Let's get started. Noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District to order. My name is Rebeccah Wilson, and I am the Acton Vice Chair of the committee. Thank you all for coming. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may use ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. We're going to change up the public participation a little bit today. Per school committee policy BEDH, members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes, with the exception today of the budget presentation, as seen in the agenda. Public participation will only take place at this time during our meeting, and we will dedicate a maximum of 10 minutes to it. Speakers must be recognized by the chair before speaking. The committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation. And I do have a little welcome I'd like to read, if I can find the right tab. This is my first time chairing the school committee, so please bear with me as I attempt to step into Adam's illustrious shoes. As a reminder, tonight we're discussing the proposed budgets, which will likely cause some emotional response, and me too. That's perfectly normal, but please remember that we are all in this together. We all support and love our schools, and we all want them to succeed. Student well-being is the most important part of this work to ensure we are both fiscally responsible and good caretakers of our young folk who will go on to become the stewards of the next generation. Please also remember how much work is involved in this process, both volunteer labor from those of us elected folks and the staff who are putting in hours far beyond their pay scale to get this done and do it right. Let's remember one another's humanity in this turbulent time. We're all here as a community participating in the democratic process to overcome the issues baked into the system. It's not easy, but we can do it. And with that, let's get started. Are we gonna do? Is anybody here from the public to speak on an issue that's not related to the budget? Students, yeah. Yeah, let's have students first.
All right. Is it working? Okay. Hi, I'm Alex Hua. I'm a junior at the high school, and I represent Resource Force, the student-led environmental team. Several months ago, we sent a resolution to the school committee relating to the decarbonization of the school district. Given that the school district has one of the largest carbon footprints in our community, we would like to again reiterate our support for that resolution. The resolution includes measures such as the electrification of school buildings, the purchase of electric vehicles, and the use of 100% renewable energy. We would again like to acknowledge the ongoing budget crisis that the school district faces and the many challenges that the school committee will have to face in the coming months. But given the unprecedented amount of federal funding currently available and the significant threat that climate change poses, we would like to see the school committee seriously consider our resolution and climate action in general.
Thank you.
Hi, Corinne Hogseth, Seminole Road. So my one non-budget related thing here pertains to what's going on tonight. My request was going to be that you reinstate the public policy comment that allows participation during the meeting. It's just, do I understand correctly, you're just doing that for the budget discussion?
We are doing it for the budget discussion.
But you're not going to reinstate it?
Not at this time.
Please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, then.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to do this all as part of my budget discussion piece, but I'm going to do the same thing. So first of all, Gary Kushner, a member of the Finance Committee, and maybe some of you care, but my last year here representing Boxborough Finance Committee. But I do want to speak about the issue of not being able to speak during various articles. Thank you for letting us speak during the budgets tonight, but I think during the course of the year, there are situations that it's useful to have Finance Committee members especially, but other members able to speak. So I'd like to have you rethink that policy going forward. Again, thank you for allowing us to speak specifically on the budget piece, but I really think you're hurting the discussions. I know you were trying to tighten it up a little bit, and I understand that, But from a finance committee standpoint, there are times when I can read the agenda, I can read the slides, but when I hear discussion, that's when I come up with other points of discussion to ask. So please reconsider.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate those comments. I think it's important for us to, as we figure out best practices, we also hear from the public. I think we're moving on to Superintendent's update.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. As we get started here, I just want to first start with some congratulations. So last week, we celebrated the 24th Annual Community Service Awards Night at the high school. We held that on January 10th. I want to congratulate you. We had 644 students receive community service awards, so that's an incredible service back to the community from our kids. I also want to congratulate Ms. Elizabeth Warren, who's one of the counselors at the high school, who won the Faculty Community Service Award for all that she's given back. She's an AB grad. She works at our high school as a counselor and does a lot for the community in return, so congratulations. Want to also congratulate two of our students, Timison Airbus and Haruki Ohara, for their outstanding achievement in the 83rd Regeneron Science Talent Search. This is the nation's oldest and most prestigious science and mathematics competition for high school seniors. So those two students both won prizes in the Regeneron Science Search, and out of a total of 2,162 students from around the country, Timison and Haruki have qualified as Regeneron scholars, so congratulations to them. Also, the Massachusetts Foreign Language Association annually hosts an essay contest for K-12 students. This year's theme was Building Global Perspectives Through the Power of Language. Congratulations to Julia Zhu for her prize-winning essay of the Year award, so congratulations to Julia. And then we also want to congratulate a number of our elementary students who participated in the first LEGO League state championship at WPI. 3 teams from AB won top prizes this year. Unicorn Dreamers took second place in the Champions Award, and well, you have to see how it's spelled, but I can't do that verbally. And Robotics Performance Supernova took first place in robotics design, and Lego Superstars took second place in core values. So students from grades 4, 5, and 6 were all involved in that, so congratulations to them. We also had some recent all-school meetings take place around the district, and I just want to give a shout out to our kindergarten students at Gates Elementary who presented some of their accomplishments to the entire school. That's a daunting task for our 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds to present to an entire school, but they were amazing. FY25 budget, this is more of a public service announcement part of it before I get into the presentation. We've been working hard to build out one website where people can go for information about the FY25 budget. If you go to the home page, you can get there. We've actually added an FY25 budget icon to the top of the home page so people can find information easily. And then we have a website that provides all of the information and background about what we're doing, including presentations, a few videos, and more. Kindergarten tours, as you know, we had to postpone kindergarten information until we had a little bit more direction about the FY25 budget from you and what we're doing. The kindergarten tours now have been rescheduled for March, so we'll be sending those dates out to our families tomorrow. And then I also want to do a PSA about Cartwheel Care and the most recent webinar that we have scheduled. This webinar is for recognizing and treating OCD and tic disorders in children and adolescents. So that's going to be on February 6th from 7 to 8, and that is all online. It is, the virtual event is part of the free webinar series that we get as part of our partnership with Cartwheel Care for parents, caregivers, and school staff. And we are sending out English, Portuguese, and Spanish flyers as well. Finally, an announcement from the AB Resource Center. So we would just like people to spread the word that the Resource Center has winter clothes available for families and adults. So if you know of someone in need, please refer them over to the Resource Center. They've been doing a great business, getting a lot of donations from the community to be able to give back, and we want to make sure that folks in the community with needs know that that resource is available. We also have an announcement from them to invite people to join us Friday evening, January 26th, between 5 and 7. Each child present will be gifted a new pair of shoes and socks, and that is part of a partnership with the Operation Warm and McGovern Subaru of Acton Share the Love with a donation of new athletic shoes and socks for children. So please be aware of that event. And then finally, Adam and I have our next community coffee scheduled for Tuesday, January 30th at 7 p.m. That is an opportunity for families to come and talk to us more about what's going on in the FY25 budget. So that's it for me in terms of updates, and now I will move my seat.
Thank you. I know the website is already getting traction. I've seen it being shared around, so that's great. Now for ongoing business, the first of which is the school committee communication goal update, which I need to bring my thing up. From the start of the school year, we on the school committee have made a point to focus on communication with the public. With that in mind, we have each taken it upon ourselves to work on a particular aspect of this. I have made contact with the Acton Senior Center, and I'm scheduling 2 events in March for members to meet with seniors to discuss the budget. We have a few dates available, so I'll be emailing everybody out by the end of the week to see what works best for everyone. There's a range. I think there's a couple during the day and a couple in the evening. I'll make myself available as the chair of the budget sub, so you have me there. Does anyone else on the committee have an update regarding this goal? I know, Yangshin, you were working on the library.
Test 1, 2.
All right, sounds good, thanks.
All right, everybody. We're going to do this karaoke style by holding the mic. All right, so we're going to call this back to order, everybody. 7:22, take 2. All right, so we're talking about the communication goal. I believed I asked Yangshin a question about library hours, now that's developing.
I did not break the mic. Just want to put it on the record. I have contacted the town of Acton, and we will be able to get some rooms in the town hall for weekdays. And weekends, we will be using the library's big conference room and the Boxborough Library. I think they will be offering the hours during February break. So I have a... What? No, I spoke to patient about it. There was some changes in Boxborough Library. They had some recent incident that I don't want to talk about here right now, but they will be offering February break. And I will be sending out a sign-up sheet. It's very cute, has owls on it. Please respond. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Because we have to pass the mic, let's just be really careful that we don't speak over each other because I already have an issue hearing, sorry. Okay, so unless anybody else has something to say about communication, let's soldier forward and get into Peter's budget presentation. This is the Superintendent's preliminary FY25 budget presentation.
So we're obviously at a bit of a critical juncture here with the school budget. You know, I hope that as we proceed through the deliberations over the next, several weeks and really the better part of 2 months to get to a final budget, we understand that there's 2 parallel conversations that need to be one conversation. One of those conversations is certainly about the resources available to the schools within the community and the funding model for schools. The other conversation that needs to be very strongly linked to that is what is the vision that we're going to have for how we choose to educate our children. And I want to start by thanking all of the citizens in Acton-Boxborough and all of the educators because to get to a place where we have one of the highest performing school districts in the state and nationally was a generational effort. Over multiple generations. And I mean the hard work of our educators, but also the funding and commitment from the community to have an outstanding school district. And I really don't say that lightly because, the taxpayers here give a lot to make sure that we have high quality schools. And every time we go to town meeting or we go to the senior center or we go anywhere else in town, there's a tremendous sense of pride in the school district that we have that's echoed by this entire community, and it's a source of pride. I do think we are extremely fortunate that we have such a high-performing school district. And I think it's important that as we go through this process, we recognize that we are the stewards of that school district. It's not our school district, but we're the stewards of it at this place and time and in this moment. You know, I was thinking back to, really one of the last huge critical moments in our school district was the choice to fully regionalize. And I certainly wasn't here at the time that full regionalization took place, but I now have been the superintendent for the majority of the time since. So I've been able to understand how we evolved as a school district and where I think we're headed next. And I think overall, it's been a period of inflection for the school district, and we have to think deeply about the type of educational experiences that we want for our kids. We have been doing a lot of work around thinking about who has benefited from those educational experiences and who deserves to benefit from those educational experiences as we plan for the future. We've wanted to create schools and classrooms that go well beyond high academic standards. And we want to make sure that we're creating safe, nurturing environments that also prioritize students' emotional and mental health in the same way that we've prioritized their academic success for generations. To that end, we've made a number of initiative investments that really speak to our values as a school district. And I call them investments very intentionally because what we spend in money is also an investment in the future of our community, and it's an investment in the future of our students. We tackled start times for high school students. We knew going into the start time discussion that based on national data, we had among the highest levels of stress and sleeplessness among our high school students. And that was a major investment of this community. It cost money to do that, but it also was about the overall environment that we wanted our students to learn in. We have invested heavily in trying to eliminate tuition for kids to attend school. We know that it's a major financial barrier for our families to have to pay to learn, and we have not believed that that's there. But in addition to just all-day K, we've also tried to tackle numerous other options that have been financial barriers for our families, including increasing the number of fee waivers we give, providing school supplies to students so there aren't disparities in what students have ready to learn in school. We've provided field trip assistance, additional wraparound services to make sure that families have the tools they need at home so they can send their kids to school ready to learn. And we've just recently opened a resource center, which is really focused on helping our multilingual families come into this school district and thrive. We've had an increasingly diverse environment, and I think through really looking hard at our data and some introspection, we've realized that we weren't serving all of our students fairly. We've built out aggressively, post-pandemic, a multi-tiered system of supports. It's still very young in that, but as you're going to see in a few slides, it's absolutely critical that we continue along that path in order to reduce the disparities that we have in learning opportunities for our kids. And we've also taken advantage of any opportunity we have to try and reduce class sizes, because we now understand that the social emotional well-being and the mental health of our students is equally as important as the academic outcomes that they have.
Good work.
Thank you, Brendan. So, we're really at a crossroads right now where the funding from the community at the current level can't keep up with the needs of our students in the schools. Extraordinary circumstances this year certainly exacerbated the demise of our budget situation. As we start this budget discussion for FY25, I hope we keep the focus on balancing the resources of our community with the vision that we have for our students. We've been in a period of declining enrollment really since regionalization. We certainly need to recognize that. In that period of declining enrollment, while we've also reduced the number of classroom teachers we've had at certain levels during that period, it's also allowed us to go from having a district with one of the largest class sizes in the state to one where our students are seen by our teachers and they have the individual attention that they need on a daily basis. We have an increasing size of high needs population within our schools, and it goes without saying that we are now a district where 1 in 4 of our students' primary language is not English. Of that, 7.7% are categorized as English learners, and about half of those come to us now without speaking any English or very, very limited English. We're seeing an increase, a slight increase, in the percentage of students who qualify as having a disability post-pandemic. And what's really striking is the number of students who would be now categorized as low-income status in our schools. Over a period of about 8 years, we've gone from having about 5% of our students to 11.5% of our students qualifying as low income. We're at right now what's predicted to be the trough of enrollment. And I think it's important to take a look as we make long-term budget decisions around the structure of our schools to understand that elementary enrollment will be relatively stable but is projected to increase by a little more than 100 students over the next 8 years. Our junior high enrollment in red is going to be stable over that same period of time. And at the high school, we do anticipate another slight decline in enrollment over that same period of time. I talked about being one of the highest performing districts in the state, and I'm certainly not going to share all of the data, but I do want to have some celebrations. Year in, year out, our high school students have among the highest SAT scores in this state, in both reading and in math. Our high school is consistently ranked among the top high schools, and despite having higher than average class sizes for all of those comparable peer districts. And 2 of our elementary schools, just in the last couple of years, have been recognized at the national level for closing achievement gaps and high performance as National Blue Ribbon schools. At the same time, we have to recognize, as we create a budget, that we still have work to do. As we recover from the pandemic, we can see from our data over the last couple of years that we still have not climbed back to our student starting point pre-pandemic for science, English, and math. We've made some progress, and that's great, but we still have work to do, and we need to make sure that our educators have the resources to do that work. At the same time, we also are seeing extremely significant disparities among our subgroups, which I think has been exacerbated by the pandemic. But when you look at students who are meeting or exceeding expectations across all grade levels in this district, we see a consistent pattern of disparity that has not yet been addressed. We implemented a tiered system of supports, but as I said, that's really only a couple of years old, which is in educational work, absolutely in its infancy. It has not yet been able to impact the student outcomes the way that we'd want it to. From an SEL standpoint, we've been re-envisioning our advisory programs at the junior high and high school, and we're seeing some really positive outcomes, even in their early stages. At the elementary level, we have established work around the CASTLE framework for SEL, and all of our elementary schools are working to incorporate those skills into classroom instruction. And with Cartwheel Care, we've been able to provide additional rapid mental health services and interventions to students and their families over the last 2 years, and we've had extremely positive feedback from families who have participated in that program. We also have work to do on our SEL outcomes. I think one of the things we're going to need to really think about deeply in the next year or so is attendance and chronic absenteeism, and we need to approach that as a social emotional problem. And similar to what we've seen in our academic outcomes, chronic absenteeism is following the same pattern of disparity among different groups of students in the district, and we have to think about how we're going to address that. I think one of the real sources of pride I heard from educators and families through the surveys and focus groups I did is that we have a broader vision for education than just high test scores. I know test scores can get a lot of attention in the media, and certainly it's a source of pride in the community that our kids perform so well. But when I first came to AB, one of the things that struck me, I did one-on-one meetings with members of the community and school committee members, and the very first one I said, standard question, what are you most proud of? And they looked at me deadpan and said, we're good at everything. And I said, maybe not humility, but tell me more. And they really did, they summed it up. We provide outstanding opportunities, not only in the academic realm, but in all of the other activities clubs, extracurriculars, athletics, music, drama, all of it is a real strength here at AB, and it was a real core value that emerged among feedback from our families and certainly our staff as well, was to maintain that focus on a broad sense of an education. In terms of how we spend our money, the last available data on the DESE website, and I use that information because it's a good benchmark to be able to point to that's standard across all districts in Massachusetts, but the last available data was in FY22, and we spent $18,058 per pupil, which is about $1,500 a student, or 8.3% below state average per student. The state average was $19,500, so I also pulled up some comparable communities, and if you know the history of AB, we had a comparable communities study done back in the 2000s, I think it was 2008 or 2009, that identified these comparable communities, so we use them as a consistent benchmark. But we spend at the level of 15th of 19 comparable communities on in-district spending. And I also pulled up regional school districts, because regional school districts are in a bit of a different position than school districts attached to towns, because we have overhead that towns don't carry. For example, regional school districts carry health insurance for all of our employees. We pay into the retirement accounts for our non-certified staff. In a school district attached to a town, those costs are actually carried on the town side, so they don't show up in school budgets. So I wanted to show a range of regional school districts across the Commonwealth, just to show how our spending compared with other communities where our community would want to be compared. I also, at the same time, need to recognize that our residents do pay some of the higher property taxes around the state. Whether you look at tax rate, the average single-family tax bill, or the tax bill as a percent of per capita income. All three of those indicators are on the high side. And yet, we still spend going on almost 10% below state average on in-district spending. One of the things that's occurred over the last several years is the town of Acton reached the maximum tax capacity under the levy limit. And as soon as that happened, were limited in terms of how our budget could grow. And so over the last 2 years, we've had to reduce 40 positions in order to limit budget growth. We've reduced district leadership, teachers, assistants, office assistants, facilities, and transportation staff in an effort to make sure that we live within the means of the community. We also have used a significant amount of district reserves to keep from having to cut further. I think a logical question is, where does this deficit come from? And it's a fair, reasonable question. I'll start by saying, without an override, we projected our revenues at about $3.4 million. And that was based on Acton's cap of about a 3% budget increase every year, plus all of the state revenue that we could count on. So if revenue is about $3.4 million, what our projections were early on was that we would have about $4.1 million in just personnel costs alone for teachers, substitutes, and special education staffing. It is an expensive proposition to run a top-performing school district in a part of the state with the absolute most competitive teacher salaries, and to do it with less than state average spending. We also are predicting about $3.3 million in the post-pandemic realities of special education costs, and that includes additional costs for students in the district and the needs that they have, the cost of out-of-district programs that they might need to attend, and the transportation services that we provide to our students in out-of-district programs, as well as those students in the district who are either homeless or in foster care. And I just, I know you know this, but I also want to remind you that that's also a legal obligation of the district to provide those services. We're anticipating $3.4 million in health insurance and retirement contribution costs. It has been well discussed in the community, the crisis that we've had in the Acton Health Insurance Trust. We've had to deplete a lot of our reserves this year. We've had to dip into our OPEB, our Retiree Health Insurance Trust, to be able to fund the FY24 costs, but those costs are going to hit the budget, and our budget, growing at 3%, cannot sustain the 22.8% rate increase that's projected for Acton Health Insurance Trust. And finally, we also have additional costs for utilities, building, maintenance, and all those other items in a school district that can add up fast. For the people who are more table and numbers people as opposed to infographic personalities, the personnel costs were projected to go up about 5.8%. We had the fringe benefits for health insurance, retirement contributions, and such at 19.4% increase. You can see the breakdown of how special education costs have been projected to increase, as well as facilities and various assessments that we need to pay. All of that led to about that $9.5 million gap. There's been a lot of talk with the town of Acton, and they have been great partners for us in these discussions, and there has been general consensus among various boards that to put forward an override ballot question to the community. In preparation for that, we've been asked to prepare 2 budgets. So working with the budget subcommittee and all of you, we are preparing an A budget, which would move forward in the event that there is an override that passes. And that is a $2 million reduction off of the level service projections that we had. So just to be clear, there is no level services budget being presented tonight. This is a $2 million reduction off of that, and that is our A budget if an override passes. And then the B budget that we're discussing would have to result in $9.5 million reductions. It's slightly less than that from level service, and that would be used if the override does not pass, which means that there's no additional funding for schools. The budget we're presenting tonight would require $7.5 million in additional funding for our schools next year. Knowing we were heading into a challenging budget season, school committee reduced the priorities to 3. 1, make sure that our kids have access to a robust system of supports, not only for their social, emotional, and mental health needs, but also their academic needs and interests. Continue to fund work to promote all students' sense of belonging through a strong and inclusive climate and culture, and provide resources that continue to address disproportionate outcomes for students who've been historically underserved. I'm going to give you a brief financial overview, and I want to apologize to you. Obviously, Sherry Matthews would typically be presenting the financial overview. She is at home extraordinarily ill today. She's been out this week, so we expect her back next week is the good news, but she's not here tonight. So I will do my best to go through the finance side of this. I want to first highlight the difference between both budgets. So Budget A is a $115 million budget. Budget B is a $108 million budget. Budget A increases by about 8.5% from prior year spending, and Budget B is a 1.73% increase. One of the reasons that you can see the Acton and Boxborough percent assessment changes significantly higher than the budget increase is because we do not have the reserves available to us that we've had in previous years to be able to essentially buy down that assessment increase. So the budget increase is 1, but because we're using fewer reserves than we have in previous years, or almost no reserves, the assessment increase is higher. From a revenue standpoint, foundation aid is scheduled at about $16 million. That is $150,000 higher. We're in hold harmless status, which means we get $30 per pupil in additional state aid every year. We are level budgeting transportation aid, level budgeting charter school reimbursement aid. We do expect about $150,000 in additional McKinney-Vento transportation reimbursement. We do get reimbursed for the state for providing transportation services to students who might be homeless. The assessments come in at 79.8 and 16.1. And you can see those delineated. And then you can see some other miscellaneous revenues for Medicaid reimbursement. That's actually coming in low in the current year, so we had to reduce the budgeted revenue for that. And then investment on earnings, where we had a large, substantial balance from the building project that we were buying down, and now that balance is depleted as we finish that project. We have to project significantly less in investment revenue. And then we get a small amount of rental income for the classrooms in the district that we rent out to Case Collaborative. And then, typically we'll receive some kind of a donation or something else that we budget into the other miscellaneous revenue. So overall, that is the breakdown of that $15 million budget. What I think is striking at the bottom is the use of reserves. So if you look at, the FY24 budget, we were budgeting 1.375 of excess and deficiency. That has now been zeroed out because we just don't have that money available. And then similarly, capital stabilization is the other reserve usage. We don't have anything scheduled for that, and that could be pending further school committee direction. This is a little bit different of a chart than you've seen in the past, and it's something that Sherry wanted to share. So this is a breakdown of how our budget works between salary expenses and non-salary expenses. So if you look at FY25, we have about a 3.25% increase in salary expenses. That is after we reduce 25 staff. So I just want to be clear, that is post-reduction of 25 staff is a 3.25% increase on the salary lines, or about $2.3 million, a little less than that. In terms of non-salary expenses, that's, everything else. And you can see in the second part of this how that breaks down. For the non-salary expenses, a large chunk of that is really two different categories. One is the fringe benefits, including insurance and health insurance, Middlesex County Retirement, Medicare, and our contribution to the Employee Health Insurance Trust for Retirees, or OPEB. And then the other one is in out-of-district tuitions and transportation. So the same things that I've been talking about all fall, you can see where those numbers actually sit in the budget for next year. The contracted services component of the non-salary lines is every single other thing in our budget combined. So that is a 1.78% increase, just to show how that breaks down. Down below, it's showing you some of the offsets to all of the costs that we have. So one is around the grant and revolving account. We had budgeted for an energy rebate from the boardwalk project in this year. That has to come off the books for next year. We can't count on that happening. We didn't get it this year because we were still waiting to be able to start benchmarking the HVAC system essentially in the metrics of the building. So that is delayed and we don't have that budgeted. The $395,000 grant revolving offset you see is what we get back from our community education program and our food services program. They both contribute back to the district to cover things like utility costs and custodial services, and sometimes for food services, lunch coverage that our assistants provide. And then finally is the circuit breaker offset, which is the amount that we use from our special education circuit breaker reserve account, which is built up through a share of special education expenses that exceed a specific threshold. So that has been reduced from 3.5 million down to 3, because as you're going to see on a subsequent slide, the reserve account just doesn't exist anymore because of the spending that we've seen this year that had to take place. Red on this is what we have budgeted each year for use of excess and deficiency in the school budget. And as you can see over the last few years, trying to get through the pandemic and the fact that we actually had to create a new school during the pandemic with all new faculty and staff in order to provide, the homeschool services that we needed to. You can see where that came in over a couple of year period of time and the impact that that had. But then really the budget challenges that we've had. You can see the increase in the use of excess and deficiency. Right now, we're anticipating about 1.75 million. That includes, if you go back to this slide, we are anticipating, right down here, about 350,000 of revenue turnbacks at the end of this year. So that has already been added into make up this 1.75. What's not yet shown in the 1.75 though, and we've talked to you in past meetings, is that we're going to need to use probably 425,000 of our excess and deficiency fund in the current year to finish off paying for health insurance and the crisis that's happened. So I actually am predicting that we're probably going to come in around a 1.3 or so million of excess and deficiency at the end of this year. Circuit breaker reserve, you can see revenue is in green, has been growing steadily because costs grow steadily over time. We were a little bit lower last year in terms of money coming in than we had been the previous year, but the state had been really helping out, just after the pandemic, and that got scaled back a little bit. The expenses to circuit breaker are the red line, and you can see that, you know, based on what we've done in special education this year and some of the challenges we've had around funding and needs of students, we've spent a significantly higher amount of circuit breaker than we have had to in previous years. So that's going to really leave a balance of just under $400,000 in circuit breaker, and it has not been that low probably since right after we regionalized. I think it was in a similar position or maybe even a little bit lower. So that's certainly an account that's going to need to be built back up so that if we do have a problem in the future, we're able to address it within the budget. This I'm not going to talk about just for sake of time, but we do have dates in here so that, you know, you're aware of upcoming discussions. We also wanted to make the community aware of different topics that we anticipate discussing at subsequent meetings, and so people can pay attention to what's happening. Similarly, we wanted to just make sure everyone was aware of important dates. We do know that we're going to have a final budget vote on March 21st. And that means we'll have to have a preliminary budget vote at least 25 days before that, so we've scheduled that for February 15th. And then we have our Budget Saturday workshop scheduled, which is an all-day event, on February 10th. Override process, just to remind everyone, it's a two-step process. First step in that, we believe, at least as of right now, based on current discussions, and this is subject to change, the first step would be a ballot vote, which we anticipate being toward the last week of April at the annual town election. That's a simple majority vote. And then if the A budget passes, the A budget moves on to town meeting, where it would also need to pass in both Acton and Boxborough. If the override does not pass, the school committee is going to need to reconvene immediately and vote the B budget to be adopted, at which point the B budget moves on to both town meetings. I want to now talk about preliminary reductions, and I'm going to just acknowledge that there are no good decisions here. We've reduced 40 positions over the last 2 years. We're out of kind of trimming around the edges, and we're starting to get into more of the heart of what we're trying to do. So I will recognize, you know, our leadership team has put in countless hours. We, you know, rely heavily on our principals. We've tried to spend a lot of time talking with families about priorities and collecting feedback from them. We've spent a lot of time in schools meeting with staff over the course of the fall to understand, you know, their thoughts and feelings on priorities. Putting a budget together, though, that makes everyone feel like exactly their specific priority was met is not possible without the funding that we would need, and so there are a lot of hard choices that we make. This is a preliminary budget, which means that I anticipate it shifting over time. Ultimately, the budget moves from my preliminary budget to your budget that you adopt, and so it's really important that as we go through this process, you're engaged in giving us feedback about what you want to see. I'm going to go into detail in a lot of the proposed reductions. I can't talk through the rationale for everything tonight. We would be here for the next 6 hours. We did try and at least put a note in there about it so you could read it. We do intend to dig in more to this in subsequent meetings, but I thought it really important, given the severity of the budget situation we're in, to get all of the information out to the community as quickly as possible so we can get feedback from you around next steps and direction. We have 2 months to go from a preliminary budget to the budget that you vote to adopt. We don't have much time in between to wait for feedback, and so it's really urgent that we continue to hone this budget at a fairly rapid pace. Overall, the A budget that we're proposing has about $2.1 million in reductions and about $420,000 in new revenue. When you look at the table below, you can see how we've broken that up into centers that we're going to talk about tonight and what the staffing change by level looks like in order to get to those reductions. Staffing changes at levels can vary because sometimes someone might reduce a position that has, you know, $100,000 value, and other times there might be a position being reduced that has a $20,000 value. And so the FTEs don't tell the whole story and the number doesn't tell the whole story, but together they do combine to get to the level of reductions requested by the committee in one of your previous meetings. Overall, this budget reduces 25 employees across the district, or 25 FTE. When we develop this budget, while the reductions are painful, this A budget does allow us to maintain a lot of our strategic direction around social emotional learning, the student supports that we've been putting in place, our MTSS, course leveling at the high school, and capital spending that's been important to us as a school district. We looked for opportunities to generate some additional short and or longer-term revenues to the district. We examined savings around cost centers and reduced staffing level by 25 FTE a year. So overall, in terms of new revenues, we know the migrant shelter is going to bring in some revenue. It's about $18,000 per student per year based on how many days they're here. But that's about $180,000. It's a grant program, so it's not general revenue that boosts the overall budget. We need to increase athletic fees. Now, we are about $100 below all of the comparable communities in terms of athletic fees right now. So raising the athletic fees by $100 would just about bring us to where the comparable communities are. We are looking at a kindergarten tuition increase, a modest one, in our A budget, just to keep up with increasing costs. Pre-K tuition increase, it's been years since we increased the pre-K tuition, so we're looking at an increase there. We are proposing a new activity fee for the junior high and high school. They're currently unable to fund all of the things that they'd like to fund for activities for students, and we have no mechanism in our budget to get there. So we think that generating some revenue out of the fees will allow them to make sure they continue to meet students' needs there. And then we're looking at increasing parking fees at the high school, which, you know, while it's another burden, we can also look at it from a climate action plan standpoint that maybe a few fewer students might drive. Those are all things that we could put into the next year's budget. In terms of longer-term projects, we do have a proposal out to try and build a cell tower here on campus. We know that cell service in the area and Boardwalk campus is really a challenge, and we've had some emergencies where none of the people who had to respond in those emergencies could get cell service. So in addition to improving cell service, we think we can generate probably about $60,000 in revenue per year. We also are developing some proposals for additional solar canopies or solar, rooftop arrays that could either reduce costs or bring in new revenue to us. Those won't be certainly done by next year because those are multi-year projects, but they're in works. Other cost centers where we reduce savings, budgeted attrition. Our original budget projection included a large number of our retirees who had already told us as of October, November they were retiring, but then we had some additional retirements between then and January 1st that we were able to include in this. We right now have a plan to restructure health insurance. I'm not going to talk about that now, but I will mention that in a subsequent slide. We looked at the ed tech budget and reduced that by about $115,000. We looked at level funding our capital improvement budget and not increasing it. When I talked about adding additional revenue streams for kindergarten and pre-K, what you see here is actually just moving the cost of those from the general fund over to the revolving fund so that we can use that additional revenue. And then we looked at shaving 1 or 2 days off our general ed classroom assistants and our special education assistants. They're still here for all the days students are here. This would mean they either have 1 or 2 days less before the school year starts. Assabet Valley Collaborative has been an important program for us in providing wraparound services for students, but we just didn't see that we had the funding to be able to continue it. We're proposing to reduce the Assistant Director of Special Education position because the circuit breaker funding that we've used to fund that is not available to us, and we don't have the money to bring it into the general fund. Similarly, we would plan to reduce another curriculum coordinator position. We had 5. But you're going to see that this actually brings us down to 1. And then really looking just at the number of days students register at the junior high and high school. It's not a huge number of students that register, but we have a lot of days allocated to have our counselors in, so we would have to just restrict how many days they're available over the summer and plan that out. We start getting into school reductions. I will note that we have to add a couple of things, particularly at the elementary level. So we are going to need to add another multilingual educator based on where our numbers are in caseloads and the number of minutes students need. We're planning to reduce our kind of tech break-fix people in the buildings. The 19-hour office admins at each of the elementary schools would also get reduced in this budget. We reduced a digital literacy coach at the elementary level, and this also reduces reading assistants. We're proposing to reduce a library media specialist, which also means we have to add an assistant in its place because it's about, covering teachers' prep periods as well. So that would certainly have an impact in terms of how we curate content and actually do the direct instruction to students. And then we're going to need to add a pathways program classroom at the elementary level. And in order to staff that, we're just going to be reallocating a lot of the staffing that we have in district to make sure that we can cover that program within the staffing that we have. At the junior high, this reduces about 6 positions or just under. We, again, are going to need a 0.6 ML teacher, but then we're reducing a custodian, an ABA tutor, special education assistant at 1.5, and then a PE teacher, which we almost reduced last year, but then we're able to save, as well as an academic support center assistant, an English teacher, and that English teacher would now teach, the remaining person would teach a combination of English and social studies. They're licensed to do that. And then a 0.4 of a Spanish position would also be reduced. At the high school, there were 5.4 reductions. They do need to add reading support. This in particular is for some of our multilingual learners. We have a number of students now coming into the district because in different parts of the world, formal education may end at different periods in the student's life. And so in some parts of the world, formal education might end more of a 6th grade level. And so students are coming in with some broken educational experience as 9th graders. And we really need to add some reading support to make sure that kids are getting what they need. Planning on reducing 2 custodians, an academic support center assistant, high school digital literacy coach, and then an English teacher based on class size analysis, and a counselor. We are currently under, fortunately, the nationally recommended numbers for counseling, so we had to really look hard and make some decisions around what to reduce first, so that was on that list. So that total budget was $115 million, or an 8.5% increase. And I apologize, I know this is a long presentation, but this is important to talk through. B budget. So it's actually $9.4 million in reductions and about $540,000 in revenues. This actually does balance the B budget based on the 3% Acton increase. And now we're dealing with real numbers, not projections. I mean, there's a real difference between a budget and projections. Projections are estimates. The budget is having gone through every actual individual in the district and reducing the correct amount. So new revenue at $540,000 and then 9.4 in reductions. This does reduce 90 staff across the district, and I cannot understate the devastation that would take place in our schools if we have to reduce 90 staff. It would just not look like the same place and very rapidly. This I'm not going to talk much about. The only numbers that are different on this sheet are the Acton-Boxborough assessments. Here, some changes just to highlight. A lot of it's the same, but up top, the salary line, you can actually see as a negative 4.4% increase. That is what you see in the reduction of staff. So it's actually a $3 million staff budget reduction over what we're currently spending. And you can see that those non-salary expenses, which are the same drivers I talked about before, really take over as the only drivers left in this budget at a 10% increase. And then the offset accounts are the same as what you saw before. So, one, as the superintendent of schools, I can be a steward of the vision that the community sets for schools, but it's not up to me to unilaterally change that vision. And so what I wanted to start with was an assumption that we're going to try and operate our schools under the same structures that we currently have. So we're trying to do everything the same way next year that we do now, but with less. We're going to talk more about possible changes at the end of this. This breaks just about every strategic initiative we have. So I don't need to read them all, but certainly we cannot fund our schools with $9.5 million less than what we would need. This does rely on increased and substantial reliance on additional fees for families. It does also examine all the savings that we talked about before around cost centers, and it reduces staffing level by 90 positions. I want to just talk about how the direction I gave to principals in terms of what we needed to do. The first thing I wanted to make sure we did is look at school committee guidelines for class size and use those as the benchmark for how we were going to make reductions. And so it was important to me that as we made reductions, there was parity and fairness across levels in terms of the impact that it has on students. So we started with school committee guidelines, and staying within school committee guidelines was not even close to possible in this budget. And so we ended at trying to go to 2 students beyond for all of our major academic courses beyond that guideline. So at kindergarten, if the top of the guideline is 20, now it's 22. In 1st through 3rd grades, it was 22, it's now 24, and in every grade from 4 up through high school, it went to 26 students per class as an average. Beyond that, we then had to continue to make a substantial amount of reductions, and we allocated those on a per student basis based on the number of students enrolled in each level. So at the high school, it was $1.3 million, at the junior high, it was $640,000, and at the elementary level, it was $1.9 million. I'm not going to talk about anything in gray because I've already mentioned it before. So, you know, if it's grayed out, that means we've already talked about it, and we'll save some time. Athletic fees in this budget, you know, we talked about reducing athletics, and, you know, this is my philosophy. I think it's consistent with the philosophy of the community. I don't believe that we should be eliminating activities for kids. I don't like increasing fees on students. It's not part of the philosophy and the core values that we've had. But in the end, we need to have the activities for kids, because for a lot of our kids, it's why they come to school, and it's what drives them. So in this budget scenario, we've already increased the fees by $100. We would need to go up another $120, which essentially means that we're reducing the general fund contribution to athletics entirely, and athletics would end up being funded fully from user fees and gate receipts and outside sources of revenue, donations, things like that. Kindergarten tuition increase, we've budgeted at $500 a student here. We didn't want to go all the way backward, but we knew that we just couldn't sustain it. And then the activity fee that I recommended initially for the high school and junior high would go double from $50 to $100 a student. The reason we did that, again, we want to try and run as many activities as we can because it's how our kids stay engaged in school often, but we need to offset, and we just can't continue to afford to fund it within the school budget. So we recommended those fees. I will say, you know, in this budget and in the A budget, any proposal we have for fees will absolutely, based on my recommendation, but it's your decision, carry a fee waiver for financial hardship. And I think that that's important that we continue to do that. And that was something that many families that provided feedback in the community said, we're okay, we understand if we have to pay more fees. However, we also understand you're going to do waivers for hardship, and that seems like a reasonable middle ground. 1.5 million in savings from other cost centers. So in addition to what I already mentioned, this actually reduces the capital spending budget by about 45%. So we reduced 337,000 there. We move for kindergarten assistance from the general fund to the revolving account because of the increase in tuition. This doesn't reduce the assistance, it just moves the funding outside of the general budget. OPEB contribution, you know, is reduced by 400,000. That's another 45%. And then we give up a lot of the little initiatives that we've done to try and move forward culturally responsive practice around the district. So the seed stipends that we've paid for teacher leaders in that area, our instructional leadership team stipends, those are the data teams for MTSS work, get reduced. Research and development is our summer curriculum work that teachers often are doing for new courses or new opportunities. Culturally responsive teacher leader stipends have to be eliminated, and we reduce teacher course reimbursement right down to the contractual threshold that we have. District-wide programs and services, in addition to Assabet Valley, needing to be reduced. Cartwheel Care, even though it's extremely important, is not a staff person for us. The AB Resource Center, we still continue to fund it, but we would intend to move some of that funding over to the migrant shelter grant. We could potentially do that in our A budget as well, and I've thought about that a little bit, but I'm hesitant to start relying on grants to fund long-term initiatives, because at some point it has to come back into the budget, and I worry about that. And then the World of Difference program, which has been really critical at the high school. We actually learned from ADL they're stopping the program. And we had intended, and we still intend to do something on our own similar to that, but we don't believe that we need the same, you know, funding for training and other things that we would have had if ADL was continuing it. At the district level, you're going to see that the curriculum coordinator position here actually comes back in the B budget because you're going to see more reductions to coaching at the elementary level. Our SEL mental health coordinator is a 0.6 position that we have right now. That would get reduced. And we would probably need to reduce our energy manager as well, which, you know, I have some concerns about because there's a lot of grant opportunities get funded through that. But if something has to change, I think that's the one kind of optional position that we hold within a lot of our district functions. Elementary schools, you know, it's a ridiculous number. This is 42.2 positions at the elementary level that it reduces. It eliminates entirely the library media specialists, and we would have to move to library assistants. It is not the same providing content instruction. In fact, you're not providing that content instruction with assistants that you would be providing with teachers, so that's certainly a loss. I'm going to come back to elementary classroom teachers, but the literacy and STEAM coaches that we've added as part of the MTSS framework, those go by the wayside. Those are our strongest lever to help improve Tier 1 instruction for kids, but that can't get funded in this budget. The reading assistant should have been grayed out. We would propose reducing the student supplies and materials that we provide. That's $120,000 in savings. We would need to look at a special educator at the elementary level and really look at our caseloads there. And then all 6 of our math specialists in each school would get reduced as well. And that is also a significant impact on the MTSS framework. Even those alone don't come close to closing the budget that we need to from an elementary perspective. And so, you know, the only way to make up large ground outside of massive structural change is to really reduce the number of classroom teachers and look hard at what those guidelines would be. So if we went to 26 students in a class at the elementary level, or obviously, you know, 2 smaller in grades 1 through 3 or in smaller in kindergarten, that would be 17 sections of elementary. That does result in us having to transfer some kids. Because if you have, you know, 65 students in 3 sections at a school, you can't make 2 sections out of that in the same school. So it does mean that there would end up being movement around the district, which is not something we take lightly and not something that we think is a good idea. We probably would need to explore what that hometown guarantee looks like for both Acton and Boxborough, and I'm not sure that that could survive this process. We'd probably need to remove that so that we had flexibility in keeping the class sizes appropriate. This is roughly what those class sizes would look like in the red, along with the change in the number of classroom teachers at that level. Junior high would need to reduce 15 positions, additional special education assistants, a full Spanish teacher, 0.6 of a library media specialist, an assistant principal would be reduced, counselor, and then basically an entire team. So, you know, English, math, science, social studies teachers, a special educator as well, and their math specialist that provides support for students who need more math. And then there's a small reduction to the operating budget as well. This does mean that we're going to a split team model, and a split team essentially means that instead of having 4 7th grade teams and 4 8th grade teams, what it means is we would have 3 teams at 7th grade and 3 teams at 8th, and 1 team that is half 7th grade, 8th grade. It doesn't mean that the kids are scheduled together. There are still 7th grade classes and 8th grade, but it means the teachers have to teach both grades. So that would increase the overall student load from a little over 100 now up to about 115 or 120 per team. And you can see class sizes. On team go between 23 and 26, and off team 27 to 30 for off team classes. At the high school, this is 32 positions. Another reduction in counseling would take place here. They still would need to add that reading teacher. It's pretty critical. They have a student programs coordinator position that would need to be eliminated. Part-time data assistant, part-time digital literacy assistant, language lab assistant, special education assistant, a STAR tutor. STAR is the program for students returning from hospitalization. TV studio manager would be reduced here, an assistant principal. And then we get into really looking hard at class size and programming to that 2 above school committee guideline level. So that would reduce 4 English teachers, 3 social studies teachers, 2 math teachers, 2 science teachers, 2.2 world language teachers. This also would effectively eliminate both the Latin and Chinese programs, which is a very significant move. Senior seminar teacher, visual arts, 0.25 of a teacher there. 6 campus monitors. It would eliminate campus monitors, which would mean that we would need to begin discussions around teachers assuming duties. Again, our teachers don't have that in their contract to do duties, but that certainly would have to be a piece of this discussion. And then moving another $90,000 of student activity costs out to the revolving account. And we would still then have to reduce actually the number of clubs and activities by $30,000 that we're able to provide to students. And athletics I already talked about. We still run all of our athletic programs, but we offset all of those costs outside of the school budget. Here's what we end up with high school class size. One thing I will say about high school class sizes is they are highly, highly variable based on the students in those sections. So, when you have an average of 25, you might have a class of 30, and you might have a class of 20, just because of how students select courses. It's actually easier to get an average at an elementary school than it is at a high school in terms of how you schedule the building. Just an overall summary, a budget, again, it's $2 million of reductions. It reduces 25 staff, but it does allow us to keep all of our classes within school committee guidelines, and we can continue to operate our programs, and it keeps the strategic direction of what we're trying to do intact. In our B budget, at that point, it's really devastating to what we're trying to do here. It does reduce 90 staff, which is not recoverable. I think, I also can't impress upon you enough that if we reduce those 90 staff, you're also reducing all of the professional learning that they've done, all of, the growth that they've had in the district, all of the trainings, everything else leaves the district with them. So even if a year later, we somehow find the funding to bring things back, those people and those skills aren't coming back. They're gone. So, it's really, really critical that we get this A budget right, and we get it at a level that our community can get behind and support, because we just can't get it to this B budget. It just dismantles almost everything that people have worked for a long time. It does program class sizes to beyond our guidelines. It transfers our elementary students between schools, has significant impact on the mental health work that we've tried to do for kids, our academic progress, and the tiered systems of support effectively dissolve. And then it also relies significantly on fees for families. So this is a $108 million budget, which is a 1.73% increase, which does keep the Acton assessment change to 3%. And because Boxborough has higher enrollment increases than Acton does, it does mean that even though the budget is 1.73% increase, it means it's a 6.7% increase in Boxborough. One of the things in all of the work that we did to talk to our faculty and talk to our families about the budget situation, and that we've heard even from, community members who have reached out to us, is if we can support an override, what are we going to do to make sure that we don't end up in the same position again? Because if we keep trying to do everything the same way, we're likely to get similar results. That's, well known in the world. And so one of the things that I took to heart was looking at where we're spending our money in big chunks. So far we've solved budget problems with either 3 zeros, 4 zeros, or sometimes 5 zeros. But if we need to start solving budget problems with 6 and 7 zeros, what does that look like? I want to present some options to you, and we need feedback about what we'd like to pursue further. So I'm going to put some caveats on this. Everything here may represent significant departures from how we have historically visioned our schools and the services that we provide. They do represent opportunities for substantial savings, generally in the millions of dollars. If I put it up here, it's because it's in the millions. Maybe combined with some other structural changes. So in other words, we could combine strategies on this to increase how we would save money. I put may, but I think it really certainly would require some collaboration and partnership with, either educators, parents, taxpayers, in order to re-envision some of our past practices. And I think some of these are more short or mid-range, and I think others are a little bit longer-term changes that we could explore. I think, they all have different impact on students, staff, and families, and sometimes that's pretty significant in terms of what that would look like. I'll just talk briefly about each of these. So health insurance, to me, is something that we absolutely have to move on. I'm not sure if that can be done by July 1. The Acton Health Insurance Trust holds public meetings, so these are all open to the public. There's minutes and everything else that people can look at. And in the last meeting, we had asked the consultant to come back with an estimate of what the savings might be by moving to the GIC, which is the state subsidized health system. And they gave us a number on the magnitude of about $4 million over the course of HIT. Certainly, it's a town and school endeavor, but we know the schools have about 75% of that. We then split costs with our employees by 25%. So, the win-win on health insurance is if we can bring our costs down, we're also bringing our employees' costs down. GIC has come a long, long way since its inception. In terms of where we attract educators from, a lot of our competition for educators is like Lexington and Weston and communities like that. They're both on the GIC. So I think that's a really viable option, but we're also looking at everything from Maya, which is a larger statewide joint purchasing group, to even much larger trusts, things like that. And then we're also, simultaneously pursuing how could we save money if we stay within the Acton Health Insurance Trust model. But I have to be really honest, I worry about the small size of the risk pool with HIT, that I wonder if that's appropriate for healthcare in 2024 and beyond. So that's certainly something, we're working on. I will say our employee unions and retirees have been great in coming to the table, understanding the situation, and willing to really have discussions around this. Special education is another cost center. I'm going to tell you, I don't know what we would save around special education costs. There's a piece of me that thinks we might have set a new floor for special education costs, and I'm hoping the state limits the increases to under 2%, which is historical norm. We could bring in an outside program evaluator to take a look at how we're providing special education services. We're seeing some real disparities still in the programs that in terms of the outcomes for students who have disabilities. There's a real disparity in what kids are getting. So I think looking at opportunities to improve that and improve outcomes for kids and think about the efficiency with which we're doing it is something I've been thinking about a lot. That doesn't come free though. And to bring in a group that has that type of skill set probably is on the magnitude of $100,000. I haven't included it in this budget, knowing where the budget's at, but I think there's potential for savings there too and improvement in services. I think it's time to send out a new request for proposals for transportation services around special education. I have some serious doubts that we're not going to get much better. I think the challenge we've had around special ed services is that CASE can't hire the number of drivers they need, and that means we've gone out to all these private vendors, but I do think it's certainly worth exploring. The yellow buses. We spend a lot of money on yellow buses as a school district, and we've made some very explicit decisions that have led to why we spend that much money on it. One, we provide transportation right now for all students in the district. The law around regional transportation is to provide transportation services for students above 1.5 miles from their school. In other words, students under 1.5 miles have to walk to school, or they need to, get a ride or something like that. I think Concord actually does provide a radius. They might have like 1 mile or something like that, but we could set a radius where we, aren't able to provide transportation services. That probably could shave a few bus routes off. We think a bus route is probably about $150,000 per bus. There are probably some additional fuel costs as well. If we return to 2-tier elementary bus routes, this is a major strategic decision that's not quick. That would, I think how we did it could potentially endanger high school start time and junior high start time as well. But there might be some other ways to think about it now. But when we added, when we went to the 2-tier elementary bus routes, or eliminated 2-tier, sorry, it's getting long. When we eliminated 2-tier elementary transportation. In other words, the elementary schools have different start times and went to single. I believe we added 10 buses to the district to be able to do that. That's a substantial cost. School closure. We have looked at what would happen if we close a school. I've been open and transparent with the educators at Conant and the educators at, and the families at Conant. I talked to the PTO and families last week at a meeting. We explored Conant because we heard a lot of discussion in the community about that. You know, on just the financial side, we could probably save about $1.2 million a year. In overhead savings from operating the school. The whole school is about a $3 million venture, but some of the educators obviously would get transferred to other schools. We could fit about 8 additional elementary sections in other buildings in the district. Excuse me, it's 11 additional sections that we could fit in the district. 8 would get reduced by closing Conant, but you eliminate a principal, assistant principal, you know, some of those other, you know, one-off services, art, music, PE, things like that. I understand why we would want to close Conant from purely a capital cost. It's the oldest building in the district in need of work. You know, we also looked at the educational reasons why you would or wouldn't close a school. And I will say, you know, Conant is the most requested school we have on an annual basis. Sometimes Gates is right there too, but Conant is the most requested school. It's the highest performing school in our district. Was a National Blue Ribbon Award winner last year for performance. Serves a majority minority population, a large number of students with disabilities in a program, which is a higher level of service than most of our schools provide, and it's the single largest English language learner population in the district, with 70 out of 400 students are English language learners. That's a really significant impact on a community, and I'm not sure in a choice model if that's really the right decision to make. But I want to be transparent. We explored it. Is it feasible? Yes. That's the savings, and that's also the educational impact. I would not recommend closing that school, but certainly, you know, we need to have a lot of hard discussions right now. Open enrollment at the elementary level has been a 30-year vision in this community, and, you know, we've had, you know, a number of people in the district ask us, you know, even though it has been great, if we can afford to do it the same way into the future. And so, you know, I needed to list that. There's significant costs that go into the busing for open enrollment because we're oftentimes sending either 2 or 3 different buses into the same road and then busing kids all around. It also increases the length of time that kids sit on the bus to and from school because we have students from North Acton attending school at Blanchard. And, you know, even with, you know, limiting the bus to 15 students, it's still an hour bus ride for kids because of the number of stops and travel and everything else. So, you know, that could be another discussion that we want to have with our community. I would suggest that if we do that, it absolutely must be a community-wide visioning process. And a result of that process might be a recommitment that this is really what we want to do, but we have to engage enough of the community members that then we say we're going to fund it. And then finally, we looked at interdistrict school choice, which is where we allow non-resident students to come and attend school here. We would get $5,000 a student. So, you know, initially we thought, why don't we bring 10 students into each grade from 7 through 12? We would actually gain about maybe $300,000 a year in revenue. We actually reached out to some area districts, in particular special education directors, because that was an area we wanted to explore. And pretty much to a special education director, they said that that is the biggest area of risk to get into the school choice. Technically, if students come in over the threshold with special education services, the sending district is supposed to pay that, but they said it's really challenging to get that money out of the sending districts. And so it could be a potential area of liability, and I don't think I want to recommend something that provides more liability around special education costs right now. I just don't think that's necessarily the right move, even though it might bring in some revenue. So those are what I think are the big rocks that we could explore that save large chunks of money. Hopefully we can have some discussions about that, because I think if we want to take on any of these, we need to start having those conversations soon. I'm not sure many of them would be feasible for, you know, July 1st or even September 1st of next year, particularly some of the ones toward the end of that list. But certainly ones maybe more at the top of the list, we could start to move on. You know, I just wanted to come back to this because I put up the, average spending per school. If we were funded at state average, so $1,500 more per student, that would be $7.6 additional million that we would have on an annual basis in our school budget. The total we need to fund the A budget is $7.5 million. Just saying. So we're not asking to be one of the top spending school districts in the Commonwealth. We know that that's not a reality, and we know that for residents in the community, raising taxes is a challenging proposition for a lot of people. And yet, as the stewards of the district, I think I really need to come to you and say, we just absolutely need the funding. We don't have another avenue to try and keep and maintain the quality of school district that we've had for generations of kids. And so we want to make sure that we keep that, we keep the opportunities in place, and we're able to move that forward. So look forward to, a robust discussion over the next couple of months. And I will now turn it back, and you still don't have a mic, so I'm just...
Peter, if there's a willingness to have like a 5-minute break, we think we can fix all of the mics.
Sounds good.
All right.
So, you want to just adjourn for 5?
I'm going to formally say that we're adjourning for 5 minutes. All right, everybody. We are back in action with all of our microphones, so I don't have to stand in the middle and hand it around as I was planning to. We're going to start with the public participation. Actually, do I have to move to? The meeting is now reopened. Whatever magic words those are. I'm going to start with the public participation. Could I just have a show of hands real quick, how many people want to speak? Okay, great. So if everybody could take 1 minute each, I think that would help us sort of stay on track here. Thank you.
Sorry, okay. Corinne Hogseth, Seminole Road. I can't see either. So I had lots of stuff. I'm going to start by saying the difference between the A and B budget, the cuts to teachers proportionate to the cuts to admin are so out of whack. They make it appear that you're trying to scare people into supporting the A budget. It goes from 2 FTEs in admin and 23 teachers in the A budget, and the B budget, yeah, the A budget. I can't get them, keep them straight. And then from there it goes only to 2.4 FTEs of admin to 88 teachers. I think it needs to be more proportionate. Like I said, one friend told me she feels like she's being held hostage, that this is a ransom demand. I had questions about a couple of interspersed things: Conant, open enrollment, and the kindergarten, and the elementary teacher reductions. If you're already talking about getting rid of 17 teachers, elementary teachers, that's 17 sections. How many sections are at Conant? 18, so, right? And so you're talking about getting rid of basically the same number of teachers that you have at Conant. You're talking about relocating about half the number of students that are at Conant. Why wouldn't we just close Conant? I don't understand how it would be that much greater of an impact.
You know, roughly, and I think this is a longer discussion, and we're going to actually plan to have more of a discussion on some of these items as we go through the process. But, you know, closing one school in a choice district has a much broader impact than closing one school. I think, you know, closing one school is also a decision, I think, essentially to say we're not going to go with a continued, you know, elementary choice program. You know, and I think that decision needs to be made really clearly, because not only would you be shifting, you know, the number of students out, but you'd be moving, you know, maybe 15 to 20% of every school now would include students that didn't want what that school was doing for its primary program. I think in addition, you know, it's going to have a substantial impact on kind of the culture of all of the schools. Additionally, because you're actually moving all of your educators at Conant. A lot of them are very senior educators. And so even if you feel like you might, you know, be closing one school, you're actually reshuffling all of your schools at the same time.
And that's why I said it's kind of related to the open enrollment. I think that program has long outlived its purpose, and it would save money. I think it would deal with your transportation issues, blah, 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 blah. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. I agree with Superintendent Light that the B budget does in fact represent a disaster. That means that it's extremely important that the A budget that's brought forward is one that, you know, finds that, you know, difficult balance between the resources of the community and the needs of all of our students. You know, I think that as long as I've been at AB, people have said, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could have the same per pupil spending as Sudbury? And that's the same thing as saying, it would be nice if we could have Sudbury's tax base. We do not. Or we could spend what Concord does. And that's like saying, we should have Concord's tax base, and we should have their reduced student population. So I get that metric. It has nothing to do with the decision in front of you in terms of what you should do, recommend to the citizens of the community in terms of an increase in the budget and the impact on their tax rate. And so as you carry forward these discussions to town meeting, I hope you'll think about it in the context of people who will look at the numbers and see that, that $9 million number probably represents, between a 1% and a 2%, chunk of their household budget. And, we could, people's circumstances vary widely. But it's a not inconsequential ask. And so for my nickel, I would rather see that number be 7 million than 9 million. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Jason Cole, 63 Neshoba Road, speaking on my own behalf. I would like to caution against a binary choice. Tonight we've seen an A budget and a B budget, and while the B budget is cold hard facts, that's what a failed override will do. That's very wise of you to bring forward the cold hard facts of a B budget. I would caution against thinking that the A budget is the only way forward. The A budget as presented by the superintendent is his best guess of the best way of doing things. I would posit that and I would also like you all to remember that the taxpayers of Acton only receive one tax bill, and the town side is also the municipal side is also seeing some of the same budgetary constraints that you are. If you fall into I fear there's the possibility that you could fall into a trap of saying the A budget is the only way forward. And I would posit that if both the school committee and the municipal side come forward with this is the only way forward, and we're at a $9-10 million override, then both entities may very well end up with nothing. So please consider a C budget.
Thank you.
Hi, Nijan Datar, 15 Wentcliffe Drive. I actually had the word C budget in my presentation here. The A budget and B budget look designed to take an all or nothing approach. A third approach, which is the C budget, is needed with an intermediate number that is much lower than $9.5 million. Hopefully, less than half that. I mean, for starters, on page 58, you have the potential structural changes. How come those like closing Conant, et cetera, how come they're not included in a B budget and listed under needing further discussion? I mean, the budget that you proposed is like the entire scare tactic in the standard political way. You throw everything and say, I'm going to cut police first, fire first, and throw all the baby first and keep all the bathwater. And, I'm not convinced that this care tactic is going to work, especially with 72% of Acton not having kids in the schools anymore. So the first place is Conant needs to be closed. And then the health insurance pool, I think you're on the right track. And you should also pair it with an incentive mechanism for employees to leave the plan and join their spouses or parents' plan. In terms of the staff admin, it's hard to know how much admin staff you're cutting. And like, what was it 10, 15 years ago with 6,000 students? How many admin were there and how many are there now? Without a benchmark, there's no way to know how much of administrative bloat there is. Like in schools and in colleges, universities, it's, tuition is way up the roof because of admin bloat. I don't know what's the case here. And it's not helpful to say, well, so-and-so pays more and we are less than the average. Well, all schools are in the same inefficiency mode. So, we're just chasing each other, and comparing it to the others is not. The question is, what is the right education? In what is going to be cut in $9.5 million, some of the things that need to be cut should be cut, like the DEI stuff. Many people are not going to public schools because you've gotten away from actual academic stuff. You've gotten into political stuff, ideological stuff, and people are not coming to public schools. That's your problem. And homeschooling has skyrocketed, or doubled this year. So,
thank you. I would like to move to the next person. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Gowing, 93 Harris Street, and I'm going to read, so it's quick. All right, one thing I would like to ask is to reiterate the chair to reconsider taking public input during meetings as opposed to at the beginning. This will be particularly important as this process goes forward because many things that come out in the course of the meeting are need to have discussion, and one clarifying of one point can save everybody a lot of grief. So. As Peter's provided us with his respective budgets tonight, I'd like to keep some things in mind. The school population has been declining far beyond 10 years that he points out. What that should have organically done is to reduce the staff requirements in small increments year to year, usually through attrition to mirror the population reduction. Instead, with the excess money that flowed in during the pandemic between 2020 and 2022, the CARES, FEMA, ARPA acts, alongside state and local grants, for a grand total of $5,678,594, much of this money was directed to programs. These ongoing programs are funded with one-time money. We are now facing the dilemma of how to fund them with local taxpayer funds. I would recommend that any program funded through relief funds should be retired unless there is grant money in hand to continue its existence. It's only fair to Acton and Boxborough, as they weren't part of the decision as to how it was spent. Finally, as president of ActonTV, I completely understand ever-shrinking budgets. We derive most of our income from PEG funds on your cable bill. However, as people continue to cut the cable, we've seen our funding drop between 3% and 6% each year. However, we make budgetary adjustments according to what we can afford. You have to as well. Thank you all for your time and effort. This is, I know, it's volunteer and it's appreciated. So,
Thank you.
Too short for this. My name is Amanda Bailey. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, speaking in that capacity. Just speaking to the previous speaker, we have a lower enrollment with a greater high needs population. Those students cost more to educate. While momentarily embracing the better of two awful outcomes, I want to pause again regarding the ongoing, chronic, disparate outcomes for students with disabilities, a population still reeling from the pandemic. This is in large part because children weren't identified for early intervention, services for children birth to 3 with developmental delays or disabilities. We know EI improves outcomes. Those kids are now in our schools without that solid foundation. They're going to be with us for a long while yet. How is cutting anything from elementary special education in the A budget in alignment with the school committee's budget guidelines, particularly the third? Provide resources that continue to address disproportionate outcomes for students who have been historically underserved. Reducing special educators need to sustain the district's commitment to co-teaching also breaks from our values. We've heard about the need for efficiencies within special ed. Special educators already contend with additional responsibilities, including conducting academic evals, required meetings and paperwork, developing individualized education programs, IEPs, progress reporting, consultations with gen ed staff, overseeing paraprofessionals, and more. Remember those disparate outcomes when you hear efficiencies, larger instructional groupings, increased workloads, all the while cutting paras who help implement IEPs, facilitate inclusion, and so much more. We've developed more intensive programs in-house to save on out-of-district costs and keep our kids in our community. We also have students who are driven to such dysregulation they literally flee a building or classrooms are cleared while staff work to support them. The CPAC acknowledges that there is a tremendous amount of thought, effort, and pain that has gone into these recommendations. Cutting elementary special educators, however, through repurposing into pathways or other means doesn't just cause pain. It doubles down on the demands facing the remaining educators of some of our most vulnerable. The school committee doesn't control the outcome of an Acton ballot or town meeting. Thank you, however, for your mindful consideration as you consider these budget items. To all others listening, the CPAC urges you to vote for Acton, vote for our schools, and support the override. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Gary Kushner, Boxborough Finance Committee. A couple points I wanted to make. One, in terms of transportation, reminder, it's 1.5 miles, but it's also sidewalks. Boxborough doesn't have a lot of sidewalks, so unfortunately there you're going to still have to, in most cases, keep the transportation going if that's a direction you go. I have to be honest, I don't know if Boxborough will support a 15.7 or 15.6% increase. We understand the issues, but I don't know where they're going to come in that standpoint. Finance Committee is probably not going to support it as a whole. Hopefully the town will support the schools, but just warning on that one. I also would like to have seen a third budget, which is something in between that we can live with, but is not bringing up Boxborough to 15%, maybe 10%, something in that range. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason Fitzgerald, 3 Ticonderoga Road. First off, open enrollment needs to go. It's an expensive throwback to previous era when school curriculums were not uniform and the demographics were not the same as they are now. We keep hearing they've changed, yet we keep this antiquated program in place. Let's just get rid of it. It's expensive and it doesn't make any sense. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the definition of school as provided by Oxford is that school is a place to educate children. Yet this is not even the highest priority as identified by the goals of this budget. I encourage the committee and the administration to reset and approach this budget process with education first. It was outlined in the opening comments of this budget that we are lagging in education, where we used to excel, which, given that education is no longer the highest priority, I'm not surprised. The biggest win you can give these kids is their confidence back. Let them feel that they are good at everything again. The humility will come when they mature.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Erica Abrazays, 7 Madison Lane in Acton. I would urge the school committee to also have a perhaps subcommittee to specifically address, I think, a lot of the misinformation and misunderstanding about the health insurance trust, and specifically the burden that the school district carries versus the town. We heard from a Boxborough representative, but I do know, the Acton-Boxborough district does serve children in Boxborough with teachers in Boxborough, and they get their health insurance through the health insurance trust, which is broken. We all recognize that. So I think maybe a little bit of education to the community about what has happened with that trust and how it will be changed going forward, and how, quite frankly, there are circumstances beyond the school committee and the school budget's control that has contributed to this. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation about what really caused the increase in the budget, and which towns and which parties should, be liable for that. So that's just my 2 cents. And thank you again for all of your hard work.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to turn to the committee for comment. Who wants to go first? Nation?
This is, I think, for all of us new here, this is month number 6, and we're sitting here looking at a humongous problem. If I hear correctly, and please correct me if I didn't, I think in the proposed A budget, the students' education needs will suffer due to the elimination of educators. In the proposed B budget, the students' education needs, as well as their social emotional needs, will suffer due to the elimination of educators and the suspension of almost all of the social emotional learning initiatives. Am I correct?
Yes. I mean, I think there's a wide gap to say, it's not a binary choice. Like, in the proposed A budget, impact on kids is very, very different than the proposed B budget, certainly. And I don't want to paint it as either one just impacts kids. One impacts students, obviously, and the other one significantly impacts kids in ways that, are massive. So, yeah, they certainly both impact kids. Whatever we reduce impacts students, but the B budget is certainly much different.
Can I have a follow-up? Okay. So I hear in the audience that the public have voiced that, is it possible to put up a C budget? If it is possible, can we, this is my personal ask, is it possible that we can see a C budget that was partially reduced service to education needs and partially reduced service to social emotional learning?
Yeah, we can certainly bring forward a C budget. I think the only thing I think we would want in terms of a C budget is, direction from the committee around an overall target for what a C budget might look like. A C budget that reduces another 1 million or a C budget that reduces another 3 million are very different things. there's probably not an infinite number of budgets that we can produce. We just need some direction and clarity, but we could certainly bring that forward.
Tori, and then Ginny.
So first of all, thank you for those details, Peter and the entire team. I know you guys have pulled some really long hours putting that together, and I think this helps me conceptualize numbers we've been throwing around for a while. A couple of thoughts for clarification. I've heard a couple of people refer to the A budget as the $9.5 million budget. That's not correct. It's the level services budget that's $9.5 million, right?
There's no budget that's $9.5 million.
Okay.
The projection was a $9.5 million funding gap. The A budget is a $7.5 million budget.
Okay.
In addition, and then the B budget is obviously a zero.
Okay,
Right?
so we got those numbers, right?
3%.
Zero is
Well,
the B budget.
Zero in additional revenue
Right.
beyond a 3% assessment. And whatever the assessment, 6.77, I think, to Boxborough. I want to be really clear about that. Either budget is increased revenue, but in terms of how we close the gap, there's zero additional funding through an override in a B budget and 7.5 million right now sitting in what we proposed as an A budget.
Okay, so that helps to kind of wrap our heads around where we're at now as we're talking about A's, B's, C's, X, Y's, Z's, et cetera. Another number that I heard thrown out there that I've heard a lot is that 72% of people in Acton don't have students in schools. I'm not exactly sure where that number came from and trying to track that down, but if you look at the latest census, it gives you the percentage of households in Acton with children under the age of 18, and that's 40%. So some of those kids may not yet be in school, but they're coming. So just to kind of wrap our heads around numbers, that's just another number that I wanted to make sure we had out there. 40% of households in Acton have children under the age of 18. And they're going to be impacted by this. I guess the other thing that's jumping out at me is if we're talking about what else do we want to look at, I would really like to focus on the page that you had with the structural changes, and I realize that is more research, that is more work, that is more community outreach, but the places I really feel like we ought to be exploring, open enrollment. I'm hearing a lot of people say that we're not sure we need to be doing this. We should have that conversation as a community. And transportation, and I absolutely hear you on the sidewalks. I used to walk from my house to the commuter rail, and we need sidewalks. But I think we need to look at those things because that's a lot of money, and we need to look at them. And health insurance, without a doubt, is the other thing, but we're already working on that. We need to keep moving forward on that hard. But those three areas are important because if the alternative is staff and services, that horrifies me. So that's what I'd like to see us look at.
One thing around open enrollment, there's changing the open enrollment model as purely a budgetary decision with the possible impact on FY25. And then there's saying we're going to commit to really looking at open enrollment, which you're not going to realize savings in FY25. And, quite honestly, my back of the napkin calculation tells me if you do a prolonged phase out of open enrollment, you're going to actually increase your transportation costs for a period of time because now you're running one transportation based on, residents and the other based on choice. And that I don't think is successful. So, I just want to clarify, are we thinking like for FY25 look at open enrollment or longer term, let's get started to have a bigger discussion?
Yes, and I think it's both. I'd like to look at FY25 just as we're looking at how do we get a budget out there that we feel like people can get behind.
Thanks. So just to follow up on that, for people and just to make sure I understand what you mean, when you say phase out open enrollment, that means, because getting rid of open enrollment, just so everybody is clear, means that we don't have neighborhood schools in Acton. So that's not how this town was built, so you can't move to, the Needham model where there's schools in a lot of different places around town. So that would mean that every address is assigned to a certain elementary school. So if we ended that right now, that would mean the movement of students out of the schools that they've been in for however many years, as opposed to just saying, okay, so now new kindergartners are going to be assigned. Then you have to think about what you're going to do with siblings. You know, that's a huge impact on the community. So it sounds great, oh, let's just do away with open enrollment. For those people who haven't lived in Acton a long time, the reason that, well, I don't know the original reason that we had it, but I know that in 2009, when I went on kindergarten tours for the first time, the schools were so different, and there were people who were just philosophically opposed to at least two of the schools, just wouldn't even consider them, which is Miriam and McCarthytown, for reasons such as they called their teachers by their first name. So at that time, it didn't seem like you could force families to, you know, go to schools like that. So now we have much more, you know, across the board, you know, education across all the elementary schools. But anyway, I just want to fill people in, because when you talk about getting rid of open enrollment, it's like every other thing, not as simple as it sounds. You know, I have a lot of, you know, things I could say, but I just want to just say that, you know, one thing that we didn't really hear about is our educators and our staff. I do not understand how they are even operating with the cuts that we have already imposed on them. I want people to understand that we have made cuts in the last several years to the administrative staff in order to try to save as many student-facing positions as possible. Our staff, our teachers are doing way more with less. They're still coping with the profound impact on students of the pandemic. I believe that I'm being accurate when I say that we have lower than average salaries in the school district with our higher than average results. And I personally, you know, I would love to hear from you, Mike, or any other member of our very, very dedicated, professional, excellent staff that has, you know, hung in there and done incredible, incredible work. You know, I can't think about a budget, even you know, I'm just saying, like, the A budget represents not level service. That means, again, for another year in a row, we will be asking our educators to do more with less. And so I would like to hear about, I get the impact on students. I'm not saying that that's not, you know, one of the most, if not the most important thing, but I don't think that we can ignore that our budget is far and away dedicated to personnel. And we can't have this discussion without talking about what that would mean for the people that we ask to come into our classrooms every single day and educate our children and, you know, and meet their needs. So I'd love to hear from you, Mike, without putting you on the spot, you know, if not tonight, then at some point. And I would love to invite as many, you know, educators to come to these meetings and to try to let us know what you're seeing and what these various proposals mean to you. Was that an invitation? I would love to hear from you, Mike. I would.
Sure. I mean, Ginny, you hit the nail on the head that we've made budget cuts now for 2 years in a row. And for 2 years in a row, we've made budget cuts not in the best interests of students. We've cut classroom assistants and curriculum support and all sorts of things that make a big difference in the lives of teachers. And, you know, I've spoken to town meeting, I've spoken here before about the need to be increasing staff. And so I can't find the adjectives enough to explain to you how devastating this year has been on educators to find out that not only is there not any political will or interest in increasing our staff, but we are fighting for our lives just to preserve, not even what we have, to preserve something that you can squint at and imagine is sort of adequate enough. I mean, the last 2 weeks have been absolutely heartbreaking in our district. I've never seen morale lower, and I was the union president through COVID. I've never seen people more anxious or fearful, and I was the union president through COVID. So I appreciate that there's a lot of big ideas. I like to navel gaze as much as anyone about long-term cost strategies and this and that, but the reality is we have 3 months to figure out how we are going to adequately fund our schools and how we are going to come together as a community and show our teachers that we have their backs, because our teachers work their asses off every single day to try to support our students, and we ask them to do more with less every single year. And I speak as a taxpayer and a parent. It's time for us to step up and support our teachers. So yes, everything you said, we are on the same page, but I think the human toll here needs really to be told. We are already, in my opinion, underfunding our schools. We are already asking educators to be heroes every day. You shouldn't have to be a hero to be a public school teacher. Doing a good job should be enough. So I think there's a lot of work to be done figuring out as a community what we're willing to support. I would love to see the A budget out there, and I would love to see us stand for it, because I don't want to see us cut one more teacher. I heard a lot tonight from the folks behind me about how we should be cutting and we should be reducing. I don't know what we're going to cut or reduce. The most significant part of our budget is educators. And so if we believe that we like teachers and we like educators and we want kids to have adequate class sizes, then we need to come together as a community and support that.
Thank you for that, Mike. I think it's really important for all of us to continue to hear from teachers, because they're the boots on the ground when it comes to implementing what we'd like to see. It's just really important that we find the balance between fiscal responsibility and also remembering the human toll. So I'm going to go Ben, because I saw him first, and then Vikram.
Thank you, Rebecca. When my family moved here back in 2011, I came here as a graduate of Weston High School. I always viewed Acton-Boxborough as a comparable district. However, in the past 2 years, we have made budget cuts that have really hurt this district deeply. And it disturbs me greatly that with both budgets, A and B, we have to make further cuts that hurt our students. And with the B budget, we have to make draconian cuts. This is unacceptable, period. Certainly there are savings to be had in the budget, like migrating from the Health Insurance Trust to the GIC. However, this does not address the ongoing structural budget issues that essentially are that we do not have the revenue to meet our expenses in the district, period. As Mike said, I don't mean to put you on the spot, our biggest asset or our biggest expense, line item expense, is our teachers. And if we continue to cut, it's going to harm our students irreparably. Therefore, I find it absolutely criminal that a district as wealthy as ours, where the median household income is $150,000 a year, and the home values are about $700,000 a year, or $700,000, I should say, per the 2022 census. I think it's criminal that we cannot ensure that our per pupil spending doesn't even meet the statewide, level of $19,554 per student. I think, especially in light of what happened in Newton last March with their budget override failing, it is important that our community be the light of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and pass this override this coming April. Thank you.
Sort of piggyback off of what Ben is saying. I think, there's penny wise and pound foolish, right? Once you start taking shingles and things off your house, there comes a point where your house falls down, right? A lot of people are here, you love your property values, right? Well, that's all because we have good schools, right? Once the schools start to fall, your property is all going to plummet. So the money you would be paying anyway is going to be gone anyway, right? Aside from that, I mean, this is one of the best school districts, not only in the state, but in the country, right? And looking at B, you're basically looking at damage that you can't undo, right? You're basically cutting off a leg. If you cut your hair, it grows back, right? Which is kind of A, right? It's really draconian, A is anyway. But B, you're basically killing the school district, right? You can say, okay, let's have a plan C, or you can pussyfoot around a little bit. But basically, you're looking at things that are bad and just catastrophic. That's really what we're looking at here. So let's be quite clear of what this is. You can say, oh, this and that. But the fact is, your house is going to fall down if you don't pass it. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to hear from Andrew next.
Thank you. Thanks, Vikram. And Ben, everyone. And Peter, thanks for putting this together. And Sherry, hope you feel better soon. I entirely believe you're sick because of all the work on the budget. This is a budget is difficult. Curious to talk about a budget being a moral document. I love that concept. But this A budget is difficult. The B budget, you said, was devastating, but it's not. It's irresponsible. And maybe it's responsible to a number, but it's irresponsible to anyone involved in education. The teachers are going to be pushed to their limits. The students will be pushed beyond theirs. And the schools, they'll just be soulless husks filled with kids who learn more about how to cause trouble than prepare for their future. We're talking about education. It's a mandate. It's something greater than a clothing company or a technology startup, a local access television company, Mike, or even, a dry cleaner. It's something that is a cultural need. Schools build people, full people, or they should, which means that education, math, science, robotics, but it also teaches you how to live in this ever-changing world, which means understanding how to manage your emotions and being in an ever-changing world, to how to recognize that people who are different from you are as valid as you are and have as much voice as you do, because DEI is not a bad word. It's how we respect each other. So why not look at this again, and talking about a C budget, but if we can't create a level service budget, maybe one that doesn't cut staff as much. Because as we go through all these things, I have some really significant issues with the cuts. I'll talk class sizes first. The sixth grade, the rising sixth grade in this next year was halfway through first grade when the pandemic hit. And we're talking about potentially moving that to 26 kids per class. It may as well be 50. Their learning has been shuffled their entire academic career, and to burden them with preparing for the less forgiving environment of seventh grade in a class with even more students in sixth grade, it's a time bomb. It's a time bomb for them in academics, it's a time bomb for them in what the school's gonna come out of it, and it's a time bomb for what happens in the rest of their lives, because they're not gonna be able to satisfy what they want to do with themselves. And then there's the question about athletic fees, and I don't know why these are being targeted. Are they going to bring us new uniforms for the teams? Because we still don't have consistent uniforms. Athletics and sports are opportunities for students to learn incredibly powerful life skills, not about throwing a ball or jumping high, though sometimes running fast can be really helpful, but the kind of interpersonal skills and independent challenges that occur in real life by proxy on the sports field. So how do athletic fees help with a $9.5 million deficit? Well, the current fee is $250 per student per sport. And the proposal is either now moving that to $350 per student per sport or $470 per student per sport. And it's at a time when the athletes have to buy their own equipment, or fundraise thousands of dollars for their teams, and even have the athletic director tell their team boosters that they're no longer allowed to provide graduating seniors with a couple $100 scholarships, because now they have to pay for other things for their teams. An increase in these fees will further shrink our sport offerings and will further reduce opportunities for students to experience and learn how sports can impact lives. And yeah, I know my day job. I know my bias, but I have kids who play sports. I believe in this stuff. And among all the challenges you offer, this one hits a soft spot at AB. It hits a place where the state doesn't measure with iReady. It hits a place that's a little too close to the bone, that hurts our kids. It's wrong. So why not ask for fully funding this budget? And I know it's a huge amount. We're 9.5 down, we're looking at 2 million. But we have an environment where students have the tools available to learn and grow at their own pace. That means that we spend a lot of time focused on the students who are high achieving and the students who need extra assistance. But all those kids in the middle need help too. They're left aside when it comes to these kinds of things. When we look at some of these recommendations, the cuts, the increases, let's hit those in the middle the hardest. The students who need occasional help, but fewer distractions, or maybe just a bit more time to learn, are the ones who are going to be impacted by fuller classes. Over the past few years, we've been dealing with a changed world. This pandemic changed the pace of emotional and social maturity. The increased use of technology shifted what it means to be smart. It's not just what you know, it's how you know how to find what you're supposed to know across a swath of digital sources. And a shift from paper to screen for learning continues to evolve how our students learn, our teachers teach, and our parents help. With less help in the classroom, with more needs in the classroom, and less time to be free, our students need our help. We're here to help create full people, people who know things and feel things and do things, love things, and know how to succeed on their terms in the outside world. But to do that, we need to provide the environment for these students to learn and grow at their own pace. We've gone through multiple budgets, removing staff, impacting service. But this is a community of choice. It's chosen not because of our great family-owned pizza places, but also because of the schools. Why not ask for a fully funded budget, or at least one that doesn't just cut and cut and cut? You've got an athletics program that can't provide the uniforms. We can't put, our fields are playable. We're asking for increases in things that aren't going to impact the large number. I just got to ask, how can we find ways of minimizing the pain that's hitting our students and our schools from this? That's all I got.
Thank you, Andrew. Liz, did you have anything? Leela, and then I'll do a second pass. So Leela.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'll keep it shorter. In our school committee training, that's required of all school committee members across the Commonwealth, we learned more about what's in our purview. And policy is one of the big pieces. And I remember them saying that budget is our most important and our most impactful policy. And so I'm really concerned about cutting staff. I'm really concerned about, especially in the time after the pandemic, cutting things like wraparound services via Assabet Valley Collaborative. Those are things that keep students and families floating just for a little bit more. And so I just don't think that we as school committee members or we as a community can say that we care about all of our students and continue to cut our educators and cut the services that are, quite frankly, not even meeting the needs of all of our students.
Thank you. We'll do Jenny and then Yangshin again.
So just briefly, I want to say, because there have been a couple of numbers about median family income and median home value. There's a large percentage of people who live in our community who neither own houses nor have anywhere close to the median income. So, I think that everybody has to recognize, and as we heard, we need to get the community to support this. So why not level funded? I mean, I think that, Peter has thought very hard about this. I know a lot of work went into this. We can't lose sight of the fact that this is significant. This is a significant request of the residents. And I think that we have to demonstrate that we understand that. So I think that that's a really important thing. At the same time, I want to point out, and somebody will correct me if I'm mistaken, that the last override we had in Acton was in 2005. Okay, I moved here in 2005 with a 1-year-old. She's a sophomore in college. It is not sustainable to run an excellent school district within Proposition 2.5. And, I think that communities across the Commonwealth have understood that. So it is a huge ask, but at the same time, this is the first time we're coming to the community with an override request in a long, long time. And it's in my opinion, it's long overdue, because these are, the overrides serve as a safety valve for communities to readjust in smaller increments. And when you wait 20 years, it's going to be a big one. There are circumstances that are well outside our control. I know that this is happening in many, many, many communities across the Commonwealth, not with the Health Insurance Trust, but just in general with health costs, the increases in state aid. the fundamental point of the matter is that, like every school district, we have a constitutional obligation to provide an adequate education for all of our students, yet the state, which requires that, comes in with, the foundation budget for districts like ours that are not high needs, but also can't just raise taxes on their residents, with confidence that those, can be sustained by their community. So 2005 is a long time. I don't know about Boxborough, but I just want to say that because people ought to know that. It's been almost 20 years. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Jenny. That's part of something that I've been trying to do, and I'm going to put more time and effort into it, is sort of educating about the history of school funding. Public schools really only started being a thing in 1965, and Prop 2.5 came into existence in 1980, effectively cutting off the school's ability to fund at the level that they needed to be funded at. And so we've struggled with that ever since. And I don't want to take too long to go into this right now, but it's baked into the system that every 10 to 20 years, an override has to happen. We probably should have been talking about this over the last few years to sort of get people ready for it, and so people knew that that was going to happen. And hopefully in the future now we're prepared, because this is very much an issue with the funding model. We only get 3% of education money from the federal government, and we get very little from the state. It's all powered by your property taxes, and that's just not sustainable, especially in a bedroom community when we don't have that tax base.
This past 6 months definitely has been an education. I actually want to ask Peter to help us. Like, I came from a different country. We have very different public school systems. For me, I think we had a conversation already this week about why do we need administrators, like multiple principals in a school. And I was wondering if you can speak again to the community who may not know, like the laws have been updated between now and then. Like we have to have certain number of administrators in the buildings to support the learning. And the other thing is that I know the enrollment has been declining. I see the number as well, but judging by the nearly 20% increase in out-of-district placement, I'm going to guess that for high-needs students, the same service probably costs more today compared to like 5-10 years ago, right? So how do we, as school committee members, when we go out and try to talk to the community member, or I don't even dare to use the word educate, but like explain why the cost is so high nowadays, like when things are going up, how do we explain these things effectively?
Yeah, I'm going to try and give a really, really brief overview, but I think, I'll start by saying I think one of the things we recognized in this budget is, it's very often that you want to look at, non-classroom type staff to reduce so that you can preserve as many classroom staff as possible. And I think, administration and instructional leadership, coaching, things like that certainly fall into that category. We're going to make sure we dig into that on Budget Saturday on February 10th for a substantial period of time so we can really do it justice. But, I think, when we started talking with principals about what to reduce, we certainly looking at like assistant principals, things like that, as potential reductions. I think one of the things that you can't separate out just the role of an assistant principal or the role of a principal, because they really do work in tandem together. And, the principals provide the primary instructional leadership in a building. They provide the vision. They are the primary source for kind of the parent side liaison in a school, in terms of PTO, all of that public-facing work. Principals are also on the front lines evaluating teachers. You can typically evaluate, someone could maybe evaluate around 20 staff a year effectively. But when you have schools that have 40 staff, you can't have one person doing those evaluations. It's not a sustainable model. I also think from an assistant principal standpoint, one of the things we talked about is they're often the ones that are the front line of responding to behavioral support that kids need. And, that's gotten to be an extremely complicated role. Education has very quickly become the second most regulated industry behind healthcare. Right? I mean, it really is. If you look at the number of laws and regulations that just govern it, I mean, we just had, a law come on the books in the middle of last year that said you can now no longer suspend a student until you've, documented multiple attempts at providing restorative practices. That's a very well-intentioned law. And it also means that when there's a student behavior that might be either disruptive to a class or actually targeting other students because of a specific behavioral need, there's a lot more time, effort, energy that goes into supporting the student who's exhibiting the behavior in order to get it to reduce, because the days of simply removing a student from the educational setting are now gone, and they're in history, and it's not even legal. And so, I think one of the challenges is as we, stress the system, we also understand that we're going to stress the behaviors that students demonstrate, and it's really important to understand that's not students' fault. But the support for those types of behaviors is absolutely going to be critical. And if we're trying to support and respond to all the behaviors so that teachers aren't on the front line of that, and trying to do that whole job themselves, then we also need to have the whole infrastructure behind it in order to do that. I think there is certainly a point where that starts to break, and you saw that in the B budget. But, it's a lot more complicated world in education, and I think that's something that we want to talk about as we go through this process. So, it definitely was what we thought about. Quite honestly, I think, what we've really tried to do is first always look at the district level, but we spent a lot of time looking at other district central office structures and things like that. And for the number of students that we have in the district, we're kind of out of staff positions at the district level. And so, we're trying to protect as much schools as possible, but we need to also make sure that we don't, if we remove that behavioral support in the assistant principals and we're stressing the counselors and we're stressing the teachers, then it's all still bleeding down to kids, even though it feels like it's maybe one step removed. I mean, we looked and we could cut every administrator in the district and only have teachers there, and we'd still have $1.5 million gap. So it's tough.
All right. Anybody else have something? I know it's starting to get late. We have 2 more things to get through.
Can I have a specific ask. So one of the roles that I'm going to have during this budget season is to push on you as a committee to make sure that we keep this process moving, because we've got big, important decisions to make. I've heard, different bits of feedback about coming back with a C budget, or we need to support a full budget, or whatnot. I need to make sure that I come out of this meeting with really clear direction about what you need from me next. So I'm going to push you in that regard. It's out of love, but it's something that we need to do. So I want to know, do you want me to come back with another version of the budget for next time? Do you want, and if so, what is it? And is there something that you want me to modify in the A version of the budget or the B version of the budget that I need to be working with my administrative team on? Because we have one more meeting to talk about this, and then it's Budget Saturday, but quite honestly, we're already preparing the binders, are already 2/3 in process for Budget Saturday, and we can't have, another 2-week delay before we start making changes. So I just want to know, what, if any, changes do you want to the A budget? What, if any, changes do you want to the B budget? And if you want a C budget, what does that look like?
I will speak for myself and possibly other members who are in agreement that I don't see how we can propose a C budget. It's already catastrophic enough having to continue a 3rd year of cuts. I think that we've made a responsible choice and tried to be fair throughout this process in developing the, now I'm getting confused, the B budget, the $9.5 million one, the A budget. I understand where people are coming from wanting a middle of the road option just in case, but my biggest concern is that if we do that, we're not going to make it 10 years, 20 years for another override. We're going to be coming back next year or 2 years from now. And I don't want to do that to taxpayers. I want to get this done, make the changes that we need to, and then be able to move forward. I'm very concerned that if we go too low, we're not going to be able to address some of these big issues. And I'm glad that multiple people have mentioned the pandemic, because in the beginning of this process, it felt like that was being forgotten, that these are very much pandemic-related costs. That's where this comes from. And it's kind of hard to foresee that. We don't know what inflation is going to be next year. We don't know, the larger story of what's going on in the world and how that's going to impact us. So I think we have to move forward with the A budget. We go Liz, Tori, and then Vikram.
Thank you. So I guess for a point of clarification, would a C budget be something that's between the A and the B? Because if an override does not pass, is there even a chance that they would approve like a lesser override? So, I mean, we'd still be looking at sort of the same tax increase as the B budget if we were to have a C budget, correct?
I think the process is that on April 30th, people will vote for an override. Then at town meeting, they will decide the number. At no point will there be an opportunity for us to come up with a new budget.
So one of the complicating factors in all of that is there's actually multiple approaches to overrides, particularly operational overrides. You can have, a binary choice of, either support the override or don't, and then it's either all or nothing, right? But there are other, I think it's called a pyramid override, in which there's layers of options that can be presented to a community. And even within a pyramid, there's different structures. So I don't want to get into the details there, but, you could move forward an option to say, look, here's one budget that we want to advocate for. You could push forward, there's a middle ground that, we don't want it to be devastating. And then you can say, there's obviously, if nothing passes, it still has to be what we now call the B budget. So there's different models of an override. They're all up certainly for discussion. I know, having talked with different people about this, and even talked with some community members who have done this stuff before, I think one of the advantage to a pyramid approach can be to present multiple options so that you don't run a really high risk of the devastating impact, that people do feel like there's a middle ground. The drawback is it also can reduce your likelihood of getting a full amount. And so I think that's something just to weigh in consideration of that. And so, you need to, in a middle ground, obviously it's not the full amount, but you need to, you don't have to do anything. I want to be clear. At least not what I tell you to do. You tell me what to do. But, I think you might want to think about a number that's sufficient, but also something that can gain support if you go that route. So I just want to be transparent that there are multiple paths to this that could be pursued.
The difficulty there, though, is that, the way that I see it, because we have to make all these decisions so far in advance, I mean, we're kind of just guessing. Are we just spinning our wheels for sort of no reason? I almost feel like if we were to just, what I would like to see is for us to take some of the potential structural changes, the sort of low-hanging fruit that we find the most palatable, and build that into the A budget to sort of show, listen, we hear you, we want to try and be more creative now that we've had this time to discuss, this is kind of where we're amending that. And I don't know what the consensus would be on sort of that, rather than having, our team continuing to spin their wheels to try and guess and see, if something might be potentially maybe better for the town.
So what I think I hear you saying, just to reconcile it with what I think I heard Lucienne say earlier, Lucienne was saying maybe come back with a C version of a budget. Yours, maybe it's C, but you're saying, I've already capitalized it, but bold it, italicize it, and underline it if I have to. So in other words, grow maybe what the reductions in a B budget are, or in a budget are? Is that what I think you're saying?
Yes.
Because that might be similar to what Lucienne's saying. She just called it something different.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to make the distinction, because a C budget really is a lot more involved than just let's just take the A and the B budget and kind of put them together, and there we go. It's middle of the road compromise. It is, it sounds like it's a lot more nuanced than that.
So, Peter, I'm really glad you said that because I'm also a little nervous about the next ALG meeting and how that conversation is going to go, and you'll get the update on that later, everyone. But I want to jump on what Liz just hit of the reason I was thinking about those structural things is exactly what you brought up with the tiered options. And to me, if we were going to do anything tiered and a structural change, it's not just dealing with money. We're talking about moving a lot of students around, right? It's potentially hugely impactful to students. It's potentially good savings. So to me, that choice needs to be offered for people to have voice on. And I don't feel good about baking it into one budget and not the other. I think possibly that might be, to me, the third tier. I absolutely believe we have to get an A budget that passes. It's critical here. I mean, I think we've all said that. If we are looking at making any further cuts, that's where I would look, and I think people need to be able to have input on that and vote on it because it's a significant impact to people going to school every day.
Vikram, did you have something?
No, I just wanted to reiterate a point that I think that people may not be clear on, which is that the cause of this shortage is really beyond our control, right? We have healthcare costs went up, just catastrophically, not just like 8% or something, but on the order like 20%, right? Nobody's expecting that. It's a huge amount. And then on top of that, the special education needs are mandated by the state, but the state's not providing us any money to cover them. So that leaves all the towns scrambling. It's not just us. All the towns across the Commonwealth are dealing with this same fiscal issue. So these are not things that sort of, we arbitrarily just happen. We were watching the ball. We've been watching the ball very, very closely. These are things that just came out of left field, just perfect storms that hit at the same time. And that's why we are where we are. And also to reiterate, we've not had an override about 20 years. It's baked in, as Rebeccah was saying, about the 2.5. This is it's just kind of par for the course. And all our property values are all wrapped up with this school district, let's be honest. Thank you.
Nation.
Okay, so I'm really going to be the monster today. I think that a lot of people are feeling the economies, the inflation, lots of jobs and everything. And the A budget already makes me feel sick. I'm going to say that out here. But I am also terrified that if the override does not pass, it is going to be catastrophic. So I'm wondering, between you and I, what we just said, is it possible to look at a modified A budget that's a 5 million override rather than 7.5?
So reduce another 2.5 million?
It makes me sick saying it, but yes.
I mean, we can do anything. We've certainly, to get to a B budget, we've already seen kind of the menu of what we would have to look at for things, short of major structural changes. I don't know how much healthcare is viable for July 1st. The GIC deadline is long in our rearview mirror. And in fact, by the time we knew exactly what was going on with HIT, we had already missed any window of opportunity to get into GIC for July 1st. We do have, there is the possibility of a mid-year option, January 1st, which actually aligns fairly well with our retirees if we wanted to go that route. And I've pursued legislative options and reaching out to all of our legislators, and actually at least one is now pursuing that at the state level to allow school districts in if they want to join, if health insurance is that big of a problem. So, we're working all angles to try and open up routes, but we're not there yet. And based on what we know today, July 1st isn't going to be that option. And we're going to have, if we go outside the trust, we're going to have run out that has to be paid on the trust, things like that, we have to tend to. That said, we also, probably in the next week, we'll receive quotes back from Maya, Mayflower, all the other big groups, so that at least we can compare and see what's available to us. But, my current thinking is whatever we choose for healthcare, even if it's painful initially, we have to go with what's the long-term best interest that we have, which means that it might not be for July 1st. So, I want to caution us that that's not a windfall coming to us that we're going to be able to rely on in a budgeting process. I don't know until I see more information from all these options what I would change in the health insurance projection. Reducing another $2.5 million, there is going to be a tipping point, I think, to where you can try and maintain a lot of the strategic direction and in at least a shell of its form, right, without, completely collapsing things. My gut tells me that knowing from what 2 million looked like and what else we could look at in that B budget that may not be as student-facing, my gut tells me if you start getting much over 3, it's going to be really challenging. Just in all honesty. I think once you get over the 3 and certainly 3.5, I think you're much more at a place where you're dismantling things. Could we really look hard at what's not student-facing or maybe directly impact kids in that B budget and try and come back? We can certainly do whatever. But I just want to think like realistically what's that number. I do think if we could think about, we have a budget that has to be in place on July 1 for FY25. But if we can also go to the community with, a really firm commitment, particularly if we can sign up and lock up health insurance changes during, this spring that are more longer term, knowing that there are cost savings on the horizon that are going to significantly lower the base in future years, I think there's an opportunity there. And then I also think, to Tori's point, if we also undertake a process to really talk about, what are the big structures in the district that drive cost historically and make a longer term commitment toward those, I think there's an opportunity maybe to advocate, like, the Finance Committee's current position is, we're support an $8 million override, but we'd only like to use 4 of it in the first year. I think there's, a lot of flexibility to potentially advocate, much more use in the first year, knowing that we have strategies in year 2 and 3 that can really reduce the base longer term. I think that's a reasonable position to advocate. And I would even hope that there might be some flexibility to go up on that 8 somewhat, but I do, think that, from having talked to people in the community, and knowing what the tax impact is, that 8 seems to be a general threshold that, people feel has a rational number behind it. So, I'm trying to be cautious in my approach here, not because I don't believe in what we're doing and why we need the money, but we have to have that money. Like, we cannot run this district for the benefit of our kids with $9.5 million less than we need. So I'm just trying to be as pragmatic as possible and lay out different approaches to what I think could happen. I think we make a really strong case to try and up $8 million a little bit and use a much larger chunk of it if we can guarantee some strategies longer term to reduce the base costs. Again, it's one person's opinion, it's mine. It certainly is based on conversations with people and understanding of where I think the community is. But you're the people who are out talking to everyone as well, and I honor that.
Thank you, everybody. I think the important thing to note is that this is preliminary. There's still a lot going on. As Liz said, it's sort of an ever-evolving process that you just keep moving through. And, in our budget subcommittee meetings, we're very much looking at all of those big structural stuff like transportation and school choice and all that, because we want to make sure that whatever happens this year, we are looking forward, because we don't want to end up back in the same place. So, things looking forward, we have the community coffee on January 30th at 7 p.m. to talk about budget. We're going to meet with seniors. We're going to have library hours. Budget Saturdays coming up on February 10th. So we'll have lots more opportunity to continue this depressing discussion. We're going to move to the school. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to say out loud that even when we do things that don't directly affect students who have not had their needs met historically and are currently experiencing disparities, like they're still probably going to be experiencing these things disproportionately. And in that vein, I don't think that I know any better than you or your staff, and so I would leave it up to you, but my concern is around, even in the A budget, reducing special ed support. And I know that kind of at the end of the school year, there's always this kind of conversation that I've heard around like, uh-oh, like, we'll see who moves in. And I don't want us to get into that like tricky position. I mean, I think we're already not supporting students enough in our educators, but my particular concern is around that.
And I think that's really important to highlight. And as Amanda said, you know, these are disparities that are very much ongoing, and no matter what we're looking at budget-wise, there's going to be an impact on them, and that's very unfair. All right, we're going to move to the School Resource Officer Program. We're going to have a vote tonight. I hope that everybody's ready for that. I did amend the list of recommendations to the MOU, and I hope that everybody was able to get the no.
Can I ask?
Do you want to put?
I just want to ask, I want to make sure I'm clear on what I'm going to try and take away. What I'm going to try and do with our leadership team between now and the next meeting, I'm going to look at how is there a way to increase the reductions? I think that's what I'm hearing, but I'm not sure, so I'm asking for consensus around that. I also want consensus around, I'm going to try and protect and see how we can limit any impact on disproportionately impacted groups who have already been impacted, so special education and possibly other groups. And I had a third one, and and to the extent possible, not things that directly impact students.
I think you're right. I think what I've heard is we're sticking with the A budget, but we want to look at the details more and see if there's any more potential areas to reduce or shuffle things around so that it's less impact on students.
Okay.
Vikram?
I just want to say that it seems like, you know, you cut too much, things start to bleed. And even, again, to the point of removing student-facing faculty, it's a well-oiled machine, so when you start removing bits from it, the whole thing starts to collapse. And we're already, I think like A is already very severe cuts as it is, more than that, it starts to just become catastrophic. And then the question is like, how catastrophic is it? Because once you reach that point of no return, then that's really kind of it,
Yep, absolutely. Is that helpful, Peter?
Yes.
Okay. I think the important thing is that nobody...
I'm saying it's helpful, but I'm not saying it's entirely doable, but I'm going to work on it, and we'll come back next time.
I think nobody...
Grant more, but take away less at the same time.
Ben, did you?
I'm going to probably upset a lot of people here, but I already think that we already do have a third option. It's called a level service budget. Already we're looking to cut $2.1 million from the A budget. If we were not to cut any of that and retain the 25 positions, that would be a level service budget. That would be a third option. That would be the best option for all of our students in the district. Already, the A budget, we're cutting services. We're impacting disproportionately impacted students. Students like my son, who's a learning disabled student. This makes no sense to me. There is a C budget. It's called a level service budget. Plain and simple.
I think the important thing is that I haven't heard anybody fully commit to the idea of an actual C budget that's separate and somewhere in the middle. Everybody else seems to say our best case scenario is the A budget. Tori?
So I still wouldn't mind pursuing something that looks like the three tiers that we've talked about with A budget, because I think we do end up having to go with something that we think we can get passed. I do think we can get the A budget passed. I think it's going to be a lot of work. I think the next thing down, if we were to do anything, would be any savings we could gain through some structural changes to transportation or whatever that's going to upend kids and move people around. And then we've got C budget. That to me would be the trio that I would put forth for further discussion.
Okay, Liz?
in a similar vein, because I think that you and I are thinking along the same lines, you know, kind of in reviewing the list that we have of the structural changes, the only one that I see that really could be palatable right now, and I know I heard you, Gary, I also live on a road that doesn't have sidewalks, but I personally think that it would be a less painful fit, you know, something that we could at least, it's not going to be a ton of money, but it'll at least be some sort of savings if we do reduce the, just make it so that the school buses, if you live within 1.5 miles of the school, then you don't have access to the bus. I personally would be affected by that. I wouldn't be allowed to take the school bus for my kids. I'm fine with that. You know, I think that that's something that could easily even be built into the A budget, just to make it, you know, every little bit counts, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of our ongoing discussions in the budget subcommittee is all those little bits to sort of tweak these budgets as we go forward. But number-wise, A budget is where we're at, right? Everyone? Okay. No changes. Other than our ongoing discussion in budget sub. All right, it's 9:51, so we do have to move forward, and I'm sorry, I wish that we could take all the time in the world to dissect every little thing, I really do. I updated the SRO MOU recommendations with just a few things, some points of clarification, and I hope everybody had time to review that before the meeting. I just wanted to say that, you know, these recommendations that we're voting on are additions to the state MOU. So what the state MOU has proposed, we're adding to it. We're not allowed to subtract, which I don't think we would want to anyway. We're adding to it to make sure that there's additional guardrails to ensure student safety and police accountability. The mechanism to sort of enforce these guardrails rests with the superintendent and with us as oversight. Baked into this, you know, one of our recommendations is to have an annual review. So we would have an opportunity every year to discuss the future of the program together and possibly end it at any point, depending on, you know, the feedback that we're getting, the data that we're going to be collecting. You know, it was an imperfect process. Some of us would have loved to remove police from schools full stop. But there were staff on the committee, and they spoke very clearly about their need for support around how to deal with behavior issues, things that are more complicated than just in-school restorative justice work that we could do. And in order to deal with that need, we would have to hire a licensed clinical social worker and probably additional counselors, which, as we know, we don't have the funding for right now. The SRO program is funded through the police budget, which the town pays for. So if we ended the budget, or the SRO program, we would not see any savings. We wouldn't have any funding to hire those additional supports. So I just want to make it clear that this is not a forever solution. This is something that we need to continue to discuss, continue to collect data about, and continue to work on. But we also need to be in compliance, so we really have to have this vote. But I'd like to open this up to a broader discussion if anybody had anything to add. Andrew?
Thanks. Thank you, Becca, and thank everybody for putting this whole thing together. My concern is about the difference between a recommendation for something in the future and a defined action for something today. You know, a good relationship with the authorities is important. Good fences make good neighbors, and the standing MOU is not a good fence, but we don't keep a fire engine at the schools, no matter how much fun the elementary kids would have with that. The current MOU has a limited accountability, transparency, and oversight, and the recommendations reacted to those limitations with a full-page list of recommendations for future MOUs. But as comprehensive as and insightful as that recommendation list is, they're only recommendations for future agreements. Without an agreement with action defined, there's no agreement. And I really have a hard time agreeing to this motion because it doesn't really do anything other than say, you know, maybe later we'll do something. And so that's it.
And I think that really speaks to the difficulty with this process, that the next step would be for Peter to go and speak with the chief and come to an understanding around, you know, what the chief is willing to do. And at that point, we've voted and we've moved forward. So it's really difficult to sort of hold the police accountable, and we see that at every level. And, the only solution that I see is just ending the program, other than trying to work with them. And I'm just worried about leaving the staff without that support that they need, especially in this really difficult time. I don't want to add to their workload. Leela?
Yeah, I think understanding the next steps and just that, like, our recommendations go to Peter to go negotiate with the police chiefs, plural. And so I think all we have is recommendations. I also just want us to keep in mind that, like, nationally, there's no critical mass of research that shows that police keep schools or kids or teachers safer, but there are certainly data showing that the presence of police does quite the opposite. Also, that the subcommittee did a survey, 590 respondents from families, 306 staff, and 340 students responded. Among the staff, most were white, which is reflective of our staff, and most felt safer with SROs in the building. 50% of the students that responded were non-white, and less than half of those students reported feeling safer with police. Parents or families were kind of in the middle. I also want to remind us that in the subcommittee meeting, when the police were asked, and this is before I joined the subcommittee, but when the Acton police were asked what has changed since 2 officers were terminated and then removed as police officers, decertified at the state level, the response was that they're kind of just more aware and will keep an eye out. And so without structural or systemic changes, I have real concerns about what that means, and I don't think that we would let any of our educators get away with an answer like that. If something had happened and they were then responding with, well, we'll just keep an eye out, because we have a responsibility to keep the people safe in our buildings, and we take that seriously generally. I think it's also important just to reiterate that we don't actually save money if we remove police, because the town of Acton funds our police right now. And so there's no reallocation in this regional agreement that can happen the way that other districts have. And I, based on what I've seen and heard in subcommittee meetings, I don't think that we would have ended up here with the same recommendations if we didn't have this budget crisis kind of spring out of nowhere for the subcommittee. And so with all of that, I would like us to, A, really ask that the recommendations are pushed as strongly as we can with the police chiefs, but that B, we reconsider this in a year. And that when we come back in the year, we keep in mind all of the data that we've gathered from surveys, from national data, and everything that we know about what our schools are facing, and reconsider the SRO program in a year from now. I think it's also helpful to note that there was a lawyer who is the ED of a juvenile justice org that was consulted as part of this, and he was on the statewide group that helped craft the model MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, for the state, and he reiterated to us that if we agreed on things with the police departments and they weren't following through, for example, like if they weren't actually reporting the data back, we could terminate that MOU. And so we have that in our back pocket. It's not perfect. I recognize that. I just want to reiterate that.
Thank you, Leela. I had a thought, but it's almost 10 o'clock at night, and maybe it'll come back. Did anyone else have something to add in the meantime? Man, part of my concern from the beginning of this process was that this is sort of what would happen, that it might be like a 10 o'clock at night vote where we feel like we're just sort of having to make a choice, and it's not perfect. Nothing ever is, but I would have loved to have a lot more time. I would have loved to have a bigger committee. I would have loved to have more Black voices on that committee, but I recognize that it can be really scary to stand up in public and express your perspective as a member of a marginalized community. There's a lot of fear around backlash. That being said, it was good that we got some of those survey responses so we could get a sort of sense of that. But yeah, ultimately, I wasn't terribly impressed with either of the visits from the police, both here and in the subcommittee. I think it's going to be up to them to sort of prove that they take this seriously and that they want to establish a good connection with the community. And I hope that the next part of the process goes well. I mean, we're already out of compliance, so we should have voted on this a while ago.
The deadline was 18 months ago.
Yeah.
So at this point, you know, it's
Part of me,
just emails from the state to me.
Yeah. I thought about possibly tabling this for next meeting, but then the other part of me thought, I'm not sure anything would be different if we waited. I don't know what new information or new, discussion we would have. I also feel that having this MOU and, hopefully a good amount of these recommendations in place would help keep students safer than they are right now, operating under the old MOU. I don't know how everyone feels about that. Tori?
So I like Leela's proposal of we revisit this in a year. Can we put that on the end of our suggested motion there?
Yes, I think we should do that. In which case, for the vote, do we just say as amended?
I move to continue the school resource officer program and to authorize the superintendent of schools to jointly develop a new memorandum of understanding with the Acton and Boxborough Police Departments based on the statewide model memorandum, and which incorporates recommendations from the district school resource officer subcommittee, and the school committee will reconsider the program in FY25.
Second.
All right, so for Beth later, it was Leela who made the motion and Ginny who seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye, against.
Okay, so do I have to name, or just say two? Two people opposed? Any abstentions? Aye. All right, so 2 noes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 yeses. No abstentions. Oh, you did? I thought you said yeah. Okay. Okay, so we'll deal with the math. So the motion has passed. Yes, Leela.
At our last discussion, we also said that the school committee wanted to review what is discussed with the police before it's formally voted on, and I just want to make sure that that is still the process.
You actually are the ones that would actually authorize the MOU, not me.
Yep, so I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but that will be on the agenda when we're able to get it on there. Okay. The next thing is the FY25 school calendar. This is a second read of the calendar. If there's no further discussion, is there a motion to accept the 2024 calendar as proposed?
So moved.
Okay, so was it Vikram moved and Ben seconded? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, so 1 abstention, and that means 8 ayes. Okay, so the calendar is approved. All right, subcommittee member reports. I will go first with the budget. The budget subcommittee met on January 8th at 3:30 p.m. on Zoom and discussed the budget proposals as well as ways to best communicate with the public around the deficit. We want to do as little harm to the student educational experience as possible, understanding that we need to resolve this crisis in a way that moves us forward so we're not faced with the same issue in the short term. I want everyone to understand that the way municipalities are funded always requires an override, whether it be every 10 years or 20 years, so have it. Our last override in Acton was in 2005, which means we've done quite well with the funding that we have. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, so please continue to reach out with questions and suggestions. The ABRSD website now features a budget tab right on the homepage so everyone can access the correct information as we move forward through this budget season. Town elections are on April 30th, and we have until then to decide as a community what we want to do. Our next meeting will be on January 29th at 3:30 p.m. on Zoom, where we will continue this work. And Tori is going to give us our ALG update.
ALG met January 10th at 7:30 on Zoom and at Acton Town Hall. This was 2 days later than the originally planned date due to the snow. ALG discussed updates to the fiscal year 24 budget, preliminary budget projections for fiscal year 25, the multi-year financial model, details of proposed operational override, and budget targets for the ALG model. Members agreed to update the ALG bylaws to allow the possibility of meeting virtually in the event of inclement weather. This is a change from following school delays or closures. Members also agreed to discuss with their respective entities a proposed $10 million maximum on the Acton override. So I'm just going to pause here because we had some conversation. That's part of why this becomes a challenge, right? Back to reading this. ALG is currently considering an A budget of $9.8 million with $2.5 million in untaxed levy capacity and reductions in the town's operating budget of level services operating budget of $1 million and the district's level services operating budget of $2 million, but that's from level services in the Acton assessment, not overall. So this proposal would reduce the overall district's operating budget by about $2.5 million from level services when you account for the corresponding reduction from Boxborough's share of the operating budget. So this is a total of about $500,000 more than the current school committee's A budget guidance. This proposal will be built in the ALG budget model so we can have further discussion. The Acton Finance Committee is expected to update its override proposal based on the entity's budget analyses and present it for discussion at the next ALG meeting, which will be January 29th at 7:30 on Zoom and in room 204 of Acton Town Hall.
Thank you, Tori. And Ben.
On January 17, 2024, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee Capital Subcommittee convened. Various projects were discussed, including the recent water line repair and the ongoing Parker Damon control system upgrade. The committee reviewed Capital Sub's FY25 priorities, addressing such items as the Hager well replacement, the admin roof replacement, chemical storage ventilation, and the condition of the junior and senior high school tennis courts. The meeting also discussed cost estimates and potential funding sources and the prioritization of projects based off of the A and B budgets. The looming fuel depot project was shared with the town, wow, it's been a long evening. The fuel depot was discussed, we'll just say that much, with the possibility of alternatives and implications for the district. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to or approval to adjourn. The next meeting is scheduled for February 7th, 2024 at 7:30 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. Blech. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I will read each item, and if a member would like it held, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. All right. Approval of ABRSC meeting minutes of 12/7/23 and 1/4/24. Endorsement of Community Preservation Fund. Okay, so scratch that. We're not talking about Community Preservation Fund. Friends of Acton Libraries, $20,000 donation to our ABRSD libraries. Danny's Place, $5,000 grant to community education. Cheer uniform, $3,700 donation, and baseball uniform, $3,248.75 donation to athletics, and Special Olympics, $1,000 donation to athletics. So nothing was held because we just scratched that one, so that's not a hold. Given that no items were held, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so I'm going to go with Tori, and I'm going to go with Ben for a second. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? All right, that is unanimously approved. And finally, statement of warrants.
I'm ready.
All right.
I move that the school committee vote to approve the below-listed warrants totaling $4,233,131.92. AP vendor warrants as follows: 24-014A, dated January 4th, 2024, in the amount of $130,787.67. 24-014B, dated January 11th, 2024, in the amount of $277,690.67. Payroll vendor warrant as follows: 24-014PR, dated January 11th, 2024, in the amount of $628,925.59. Payroll warrant as follows: P2414, dated January 11th, 2024, in the amount of $3,168,465.17. Student activities warrant as follows: 24-014SH, dated January 4th, 2024, in the amount of $22,945.82. Arbiter sports warrant as follows: 24-014AS, dated January 4th, 2024, in the amount of $4,317 even.
Second.
All right, so that was Liz and then Tori for second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any noes? Any abstentions? It's unanimously approved. Peter, is there anything that you would like to highlight in the FYI?
No.
All right.
I think we've
It's
highlighted
after
enough
10.
tonight.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
All right, so Tori and Ben, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any noes or abstentions? All right, then we're adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.